Right. Hello. It's been a little while again. um, I talked previously about wanting to kind of do regular streams. Unfortunately, December got away from me, and I wanted to be a little bit more focused in January. And then over the past couple of weeks, I've had a swollen gum and sore jaw problem, and that didn't really seem like it was going to be a good fit for streaming. But here we are. I've sort of more properly announced that I'm working on this project. So that's really cool. I'm probably going to be showing off a little bit of that later. What I want to what I want to dig into today is what I wanted to lead with in December when I first started working on stuff, which was um, to talk about everything that I'd done in 2021 after working on the prototype, but before starting on this full version of the game. So, um, just to give some background here, I had plans to pitch a different game for funding, and after I made the Bonesweeper prototype, I weighed things up and decided that Bonesweeper was the right project to go with because it was smaller scope and easier to communicate what exactly it was going to be. In terms of having something that I can pitch to people and say, hello, I can not only can I demonstrate that I can make games, but here is a game I would like to make, and here is how you can see that it's something that's achievable. It's I don't know. In many cases I'm often I feel like I'm not as good a communicator as I would like to be, and I feel like there's a lot of things that I can see, um, in terms of creative vision, right? I think there's a lot of things that I can see and envision and know exactly how I would go about approaching them and know exactly what that design is, but not necessarily be able to present that in any meaningful way to people who don't know or understand the work and the process involved. So, you know, for anybody who's looked at my previous projects, like if you've looked at the well, hang on, let's bring up some old stuff, right? Where are we? I got a file browser over here. Dev stuff. Nope. Concept stuff. Did I not save any of? Oh, I didn't. Okay, well that's fine. We can still work around this. We can work around this. This is fine. This is fine. Come over here. We'll get there. I know what I'm doing. Past me planned ahead and made it easy for me to find this stuff. We want to go back and look at the old thread for the prototype. So for a bunch of time, or for most of Bonesweeper looked like this, and at the beginning when you've got nothing to show and you're just kind of working with placeholder assets, that can be a bit of a handicap for communicating a project to people who don't understand that it progresses along. And then you do like your first pass, which is kind of, I can see in this what the final thing is going to be, and in this I can see what this full version is going to look like, which is nothing like what's on screen here. And so it's all sort of iterative, and you build it up and you come up with ways to refine things and make them more solid. And this is obviously a very compressed example because I think this might be one afternoon's work, getting like the game functionality working, and then getting this kind of starting to refine the visual style of what would be in the prototype. You know, that's the kind of situation we're dealing with, but we're dealing with it on a much smaller scale. or sorry, much larger scale when we're talking about a much bigger project. Um, I need to be able to, for everything in the game, communicate how it's going to progress from colored cubes to something that is visually recognizable as what it's going to be through to, a finished thing. Um, and so yeah, as part of this whole finding the right project to go with when chasing funding, um, Bonesweeper felt like the one that was easiest to describe and easiest to guide other people towards understanding what the final vision is going to be, right? The other project, which is called Hatcher, is something that I would still like to make, but is about being a person who hatches eggs in a world where everything hatches from eggs, and I have very specific and conscious things that I want to express through that, but communicating that to people is a lot harder than saying, okay, well, from a gameplay perspective, this is Minesweeper. You already know what Minesweeper is. And you make skeletons, dinosaur skeletons. You already know what dinosaur skeletons are. It's pretty straightforward. So yeah, the conceptual shorthand that I can lean on with Bonesweeper is a lot simpler than what I would have had access to with Hatcher. And so, as part of putting together the grant application, like the core of it was what I guess it's technically a game design document, or would fall under the umbrella of what most people would call a game design document, but honestly it's not very game design focused, so I don't really feel super driven to call it a game design document. I'm just calling it a concept doc, and that's what we're going to focus on talking about today. Can we make this? Will we go? Will we go? We go to 125%? Yeah, there we go. That feels a bit more comfortable. All right. So this is how big is this? 28-page document that I wrote. We've got a nice table of contents here, but we'll skip that. I want to make something that went over the broad strokes of what the game is, gave specifics and details where those are needed to help convey what it is that the game is trying to do in a particular case. And so yeah, I think from the bat, something that was really important to me to start with is like the domain for because this is, broadly speaking, this is primarily going to be read by people who don't know anything about game development and may or may not know anything about paleontology. And both of those are very deep disciplines that have, you can spend an entire lifetime learning about the ins and outs of that stuff. And so up front, I put specific, and this is me being like a bit cheeky, I guess. But I wanted to put boundaries on the scope of what this document is going to cover, and so, the document is about describing the game. It's not about describing anything about dinosaurs or prehistoric creatures, right? I still need to be able to refer to those, but it's not my job to give people paleontology 101, right? It might be my job to do that within the content of the game, but it's not my job to do that as part of this document. And so I'm also telling people that if they're reading this, I am expecting them to have also played the prototype, and that kind of gets me off the hook for some of the, explaining some stuff, because I can say this is as it is in the prototype. And I felt like that made this document a lot easier to write by setting those boundaries of things that I am going to be covering, or excluding stuff that I'm not going to be talking about, and just removing the weeds that I can get lost in, and then just kind of slightly passive aggressive, enjoy the learning opportunity it will enrich you. It makes me very happy to write that kind of stuff. Sometimes you got to do that, right? You got to, if you're doing something that is drudging and unfulfilling, sometimes you got to take a moment to do something that pleases yourself. But anyway, so with that aside, I wanted to just give this like broadest overview of what is Bonesweeper and the sort of vague, the most tightest description is that Bonesweeper is Minesweeper for digging up fossils. Like that's as succinct as I can get it. I think it conveys most of what the core of the game is, and then outside of that, the rest of the game is about allowing you to track progress and be rewarded for progress, and access further content by digging up more fossils. So in my mind, the skeleton assembly is a bonus level that you get once you've got a whole skeleton kind of thing. Even though you can mess up and destroy stuff. But in my mind, that's kind of like a bonus level. And then the museum stuff is more like a kind of trophy cabinet. Maybe like the trophy case in X-Wing, or achievements or whatever. But it's intrinsic. It's a part of the game rather than something that's separate. And people get like really attached to this sort of stuff. We'll talk about that a bit later. And then yeah, the other sort of aspect that I think is important to highlight, when talking about what the concept is to talk about the dig selection globe thing, being a place where you pick where you're going to go, and species are only going to show up in the locations where you find them, in where we have found them in the real world. I haven't talked about here, but later on we'll talk about specifics of that. But yeah, so like that means that in terms of interactivity, that description also separates it from the prototype as well, because in the prototype you just pick from a drop down, and the locations are picked randomly, and species are picked randomly, and it's just the quickest and dirtiest solution that I could come up with. But yeah, that's it at its core. Is that it's Minesweeper, but we're digging up fossils, and then we've got all this extra stuff that's meant to make digging up fossils feel a little bit more resonant, and feel a little bit more enjoyable, and feel a little bit more rewarding. So from that point, I'm going to talk about what, in broad strokes, as an overview, what is the gameplay about, and that's about visiting multiple dig sites in succession to accumulate more and more fossils. So loosely describing how that kind of gameplay works. The assembly phase is going to have two different modes in this larger version. So in the prototype, there's what I'm going to call action mode, which has similar controls to Tetris. If you've played the prototype, you'll be familiar with that. The bones fall through space, and you have to align them so that they lock into place, otherwise they'll smash. I also want to add what I'm going to call a puzzle mode, where you have a place that you pick up the next bone from, and it attaches to the mouse cursor, and you like right click to rotate it and left click to place it. And so that, same kind of thing that's happening, but it's not real time anymore. It becomes like responsive to your actions only. And I think that, in my mind, I think there's interesting juxtaposition between having the kind of turn-based dig phase and this real-time, high-attention, bonus thing that you get to do with building the skeletons. But I understand that there's going to be a portion of the player base, maybe that's large, maybe that's small, I don't know, we'll work that out as we get closer to release, I guess. But yeah, there's going to be a portion that doesn't want that real time or stressful gameplay, and having the puzzle mode is going to be an important aspect of making the game accessible to those people, and also accessible to people who don't have the motor skills to be doing the action mode. I really don't quite know what I'm gonna do for puzzle mode for blind players, but I got some ideas. We'll work that out. And then yeah, the museum is somewhere that we can place our assembled skeletons, and the idea being that we can customize the environment a bit and we can walk around it and stuff. And then there's another aspect here that I've been super light on here, and I won't really touch on it until later. But the idea is that there's going to be some kind of research system that allows you to spend your surplus bones, your spare stuff. And then yeah, moving down to sort of aesthetics, which is not just the visual style, but audio and general tone and feel. But to be honest, I think it's only visual stuff that I talk about here. I wanted to give the idea that this full version of Bonesweeper will look very different to the prototype. Like the prototype has this very kind of low poly, hard edges type thing going on. And to be honest, it I didn't have any plans. I just put everything together very aimlessly for the prototype because that's what I was doing at the time. Like I wanted a project where I didn't have any goals or plans or specific things that I wanted to accomplish, and so what came out of that, I'm proud of it. I think it's good. I think it's good work. But it doesn't represent conscious art direction, and I don't think it represents where I want to take this version of the game. So what I want to try and focus on with this is being cute and friendly. And I would like it to be of a degree higher fidelity than what's in Hive Time or what's in the prototype. It'll still be low poly, but I am intending to make that smooth shaded and textured, whereas the prototype is not, and use that to. I'm trying to think of a nice example or touchstone. I mean, I guess. I don't know, because any examples that I give that are giving me inspiration are probably going to be a bit higher quality than I'm going to be able to manage on my own, but I think that the level of fidelity that I would like to aim for sits somewhere between Animal Crossing and Assault Android Cactus, and both of those have very kind of cute, stylized presentations as well. So if there's a spectrum, then somewhere in the middle between those two, and maybe a little bit less polished because I'm not quite as good an artist as Tim is. Yeah, I would like to give the map screen a parchment look and feel, which I've mentioned here in the document. If you've been looking at any of the stuff that I've shared this past week, then you'll know that that's not how things currently look, but that's the plan. And I even have a parchmenty looking globe up here behind me to use as a reference, but for getting placeholders and experimenting with workflows, I don't think I really want to spend a lot of time digging down into working out what my materials and shaders are going to be like for that parchment stuff. That's something I can deal with a little bit later in development. But I would like to have big thick red travel lines as you move from dig site to dig site, or go back to your museum or whatever. That kind of thing that I think had been around a lot longer by that point, but in the current popular consciousness is sort of popularized by Indiana Jones, which, really important to acknowledge that was intentionally retro and intentionally evoking old serials, which I'm sure that, I'm not as well versed in the older stuff, so I don't know exactly what it's being drawn from, but I would imagine that that whole like line on a map showing as part of a travel montage is probably a fairly iconic thing that Indiana Jones was drawing on, rather than something that Indiana Jones was invented for Indiana Jones. But anyway, I think that's something that can fit really well with the sort of thing that I would like to do here. I would like the dig sites to feel a little bit more grounded and a little bit more real. So in the prototype, it's just very abstract. You've got like a flat background and then the tiles sitting on top of that. In this full version, what I would like to do is to depict more of the surrounds of the dig site. And that might be tents and tables and tubs, and I'm running out of things that start with T. But yeah, like gear and equipment and signs of an active dig site I think would be nice to have. But also some of the surrounding geology and geography as well. So your rocks and hills and mountains and maybe trees. And stuff, just to contextualize that as happening within the world. Yeah, I'm actually kind of excited for that aspect as well. I need to be conscious about like performance overheads. Like I want to try and keep it minimal. I would like to, like, someone told me that they got Hive Time running comfortably on a Raspberry Pi the other day, and that they're running the Bonesweeper prototype on a Raspberry Pi. You know, if I can make the full version run on a potato as well, then that will mean that I am servicing more people and I'm contributing to keeping lower powered and older hardware relevant for longer, which feels like a environmentally responsible thing to do. So yeah, I want to be conscious about not overloading the game with all of this unnecessary detail. To the extent that it communicates that these are grounded real-world locations, or caricatures of real-world locations. But the idea that they are real physical spaces within the game's universe is you know, whatever I need to do that is sort of the minimum, and then we'll see how we go. The other thing that I would like to have happen there is to have the player's avatar walk around the outside of the dig site and, you know, point at stuff, or just have some presence, right? You don't control that directly. They just wander around and be cute while you're doing your thing. Maybe I might set them up so that some of their actions might act as hints. Maybe, I don't know. Have a think about it. So then moving on to assembly. I want assembly to sort of happen in a stylized lab or workshop, with sort of scaffolding present to have the avatar climb up and down the scaffolding with the fossils that then fall. Like, I think that's kind of fun. Depending upon how it works, maybe in puzzle mode it could be cool to have the avatar like pass the thing to your mouse cursor. That could be kind of fun. Yeah, it's interesting. It's cool. I'm looking forward to doing that. That one's going to be a little bit harder to do the staging of, like the visual composition and framing will be a little bit harder to make work, and I need to do some thinking about how to handle scale as well. Like if you're working on a massive sauropod, how does that look different to if you're working on like a tiny theropod, you know, or maybe a tiny reptile, or maybe a tiny mammal. You know, I do want to leave space to allow these different scales to exist, but still want to have the mechanical expression of the gameplay be the same. So yeah, things for me to think about along the way there. And then the museum phase is going to allow the character to, like your avatar, you will actually control the character via some kind of third-person camera, which again, if you've been paying attention to the stuff that's happened that I've shared in over the last week, then you'll have seen an example of that. Um, but yeah, this idea of like you create the space, um, and you decorate it as you want, with the things that you found and things that you've unlocked. Um, yeah, maybe with some Easter eggs here and there, maybe some seasonal stuff here and there. You know, like try and give people room to feel like they can have fun. Um, and then the other thing I want to touch on the sort of overview here is to talk about outcomes, which is like my very loose way of touching on like who is this game for, what is the target audience, um, what what platforms is it going to target, like what is the game's relationship with uh, its release audience and the world going to be. And so yeah, wanted to like my goal from like a I guess the instigation, the conceptual origin of this was to come up with a way to present Minesweeper without like death or explosions. Want to have something that's peaceful and about exploring and discovering. And you know, like if Minesweeper itself is about clearing sea mines, but there's no, at least as far as the Minesweeper games that I've played, there's no context for whether you're doing that so that military actions can take place there, or whether you're doing that after a war so that like people can safely use those waters, or animals can live safely in those waters. Like there's not much context there, but it is like wholly steeped in the context of war and the practice of mining, which is it's got a whole big bag of yikes attached to it, right? So yeah, I wanted to do something that was fun and more appropriate toward the kind of stuff that I'm making at the moment, I guess. I also wanted to try and do the same kind of thing that I'm doing for bees in Hive Time, which is to present them in a fun and interesting way, and hopefully have that be a gateway to people, for people who want to, who then are then inspired to go and learn more and discover more about the roles of bees and the values that they give our societies and the world at large. And so yeah, if I can make something that's like here's kind of like a caricature of what paleontology is, but if it gets you excited and engaged, it's also like an introduction to some real stuff that you can then use as a launching platform to go and find research papers and you know maybe go and study and do that for real, so that would be cool. The way that the game is intended to be engaged with is that you like do a couple of digs, and then have a break, go do something else, and like maybe play that once a week, maybe play that once a day, whatever suits you. But like the idea is that it's just like a play one or two digs as a short sitting, in the way that most people engage with Minesweeper, which is that they play a couple of rounds until they feel satisfied, and then they go off and do other stuff. And that's how I would like Bonesweeper to be approached. Yeah. And then as far as age range, it's like I feel like it's it's an all ages kind of thing. Like Minesweeper's pretty approachable. This, if you're a really little kid, you're gonna have a little bit of trouble with the whole deductive reasoning thing, but I don't think that's necessarily a big challenge. 6 to 99 felt like a good age range to just pull out of my backside. And then it's like, who doesn't like dinosaurs? Dinosaurs for all ages as well. Yeah, I don't feel like I'm targeting anyone in particular, or like targeting anybody specifically. I think this is more of a kind of generally accessible game. Like it's not focused on any kind of specific niche that I can think of. Whereas I might say that Hive Time is really only going to be properly enjoyed by people who enjoy management sims. I feel like Bonesweeper doesn't have quite that same kind of restriction. There are plenty of people who aren't going to enjoy Minesweeper, but I think that it's less of a specific niche. Like it's a generic puzzle game rather than a more specific thing. I think, at least that's the way it is in my mind. And then yeah, obviously targeting the three major desktop platforms. So looking at the gameplay loop, it's all about bouncing back and forth between dig sites in the map to get more fossils. Once you've gotten enough fossils, you head off into the assembly phase, and then back to repeat that again. And so the idea is that you're kind of doing these little loops, and once you've got enough to get in a bit of extra content, we expand outward. But then we don't expand outward further until we've done that a bunch of times. So we've kind of got these scales of repetition that we do. I mean, I'm not going to stop anybody from just going straight to the museum if that's what they want to do, but in terms of the way that the game flow works and the way that the game content is exposed and presented to users, it's all about you know, building up enough digs to assemble a skeleton, getting enough skeletons to make interesting museum exhibits, and rinse and repeat kind of thing. Yeah, and then through this section, I'm talking about like what is the gameplay role of each phase, and how does that like work within the context of the game as a whole, and how does it work to create things resonant. And so the map's role is to expose a couple dig sites at a time to players in a way that gives some context to like geographical context to where those dig sites are. There's another thing that I've added, which you can see in the example stuff that I've done, where there's a slider, and you can use the slider to control like geologic time. So you can go, okay, yeah, like I'm doing this dig in South Australia, and we're digging up these marine animals. But if we go back, if we move the time slider back far enough, we can see that the at the point that these animals were from, that area was underwater, and that's interesting, right? Like that's some extra context that gives you something that's, while it's not valuable to gameplay, I think it's valuable to your understanding and experience of being a paleontologist within the game. And I didn't mean to bump that. It's fine. And then also the other thing that you can get is like you go back far enough and you're like, oh, I see. Okay, this is, we find this particular species in these locations that are currently geologically distant, but if we go back far enough in time, we can see that those places are actually close together, and maybe that's how these populations were able to be split up. Like I think that kind of extra context is interesting. I think that sort of stuff is valuable for helping players understand the context of what they're doing. Like I think that's interesting. I don't want the map to feel accurate. Like I want it, as I said, I want to kind of go with this sort of stylized parchment look and feel, so that it doesn't feel like it's being presented as being like this hyper realistic thing. What I want it to do is kind of just feel like it's giving you a broad strokes idea of what's going on. Oh, that's interesting. Timothy Mark in chat has mentioned that the Melbourne Museum is assembling a new Triceratops skeleton exhibit. That's cool. That's cool. I have very mixed feelings on whether now is the time to be encouraging people to go to museums in person, but it is nice to know that there are cool exhibits being put together. So from a gameplay perspective, there'll be a huge range of possible dig sites, and every time you visit the map, or there will be some notion of time. I haven't really talked about that here. I think maybe I have. I don't know. But yeah, the idea is that dig sites are only available for a limited amount of time, and then time only passes when you actually do a dig. So you kind of, maybe you have 3 digs to pick from, and you pick a dig to do, and you go off and you do that dig, and you come back, and there's 3 digs again, but not the one that you just did, and maybe another one expired in the meantime, and so there's one that you can do that you've already know about, but you've got 2 fresh ones to pick from. So the idea of cycling in new dig sites feels valuable. And then, as I said before, I want to limit the species that you can find to things that actually lived in that region. And so there'll be a sort of range of possible species that you can find at a particular dig site, and you don't know what you're going to end up with. I used to live with someone who played Pokemon Go a bunch, and it had this thing where you could see silhouettes of Pokemons that were in the region, but it was just a silhouette. It was kind of non-distinct. And if they were really close, then I think it showed you, the actual picture of the thing. This way of kind of like telling you a little bit about what the possibility space is. I think that's kind of interesting. Like, I like that idea of going, okay, well here's, if you've previously discovered this species, then maybe you know that it's here, and that you get to see the specifics of that in the list of things that can be found at this dig site, but maybe there's 3 or 4 other species that you have never seen within the game yet, and they would be presented as more abstract or less distinct things, or maybe just question marks. I don't know. That's something to work out as I go. But yeah, I do like this idea of, like, as once you've found one bone of a species, then I think that's enough, because once you've got one, then you will probably want to be actively chasing more fossils from that species so that you can build a skeleton. So giving you, once you've found one, then giving you the ability to know that you've got a good chance, or a not good chance, of finding that particular species at a particular dig site. I think like that gives you the ability to make more interesting decisions about which dig site you're going to pick. And then each dig site will have its own, size and difficulty, which you'll be able to see from the map screen when you're making your decision about where you're going to go. But I think that'll be picked arbitrarily. Like, I don't think they'll be entirely random. Well, not entirely random. I'll do the same as in the prototype. I'll make sure that I give you at least one big one, at least one small one, at least one medium-sized one, at least one hard one, at least one easy one, at least one difficult one, so that you've got like a spread of stuff to choose from. But I don't think I'll sort of tie that to anything in particular. Like, I won't go, okay, well this particular place is known for having difficult geography, and so that's should represent a more difficult dig. Like, I don't think it makes sense to have difficulty be managed like that. No, welcome Splurp. Always good to see you. Feel free to ask any questions. I'm currently going over the concept document that I wrote before doing my grant application. So yeah, just working through the doc, talking about what mostly this is about explaining the plans for the game, but also in context, this is the document that I had to write that made up the core of my grant application. How many bones do you get per dig? Well, hang on, we're about to move on to that. Yeah, I think we covered everything about the map screen there. Okay, so the number of tiles within a dig space will be determined by the size, and so that will also influence the number of fossils that will be available there. difficulty will also determine the number of fossils. So the more difficult it is, the more dense it is, because that's like how Minesweeper works, right? But I don't know whether or not... I don't think I'm going to have a one-to-one mapping between tiles that have fossils in them and fossils that are going to be useful for building skeletons. So in the prototype I have this notion of miscellaneous fossils, and they might be trace fossils like footprints and stuff, or coprolites, which is fossilized poo. There's also some eggs and other like small creatures that are just one thing, like a trilobite. And so during the assembly phase, you've actually got to sort those out from the regular fossils that you're trying to build a skeleton from, as another thing to think about in the middle of everything else going on. So I'm going to use that to tune the amount of stuff that you get from a particular dig. Yeah, like at the moment in the prototype, it's like if you do a medium-sized dig with medium difficulty, I think you're probably going to find maybe a dozen fossils, maybe 20. And then probably a third of those will be miscellaneous fossils, and the rest of them will just be random for the species that's at that dig site. But in the full version, I want to allow you to find fossils from multiple species at a single dig site. Obviously, the full version is going to have a lot more species than the prototype did, and the prototype just didn't have the amount of content that I would need in order to make that work. So yeah, the idea is that you would do multiple digs in order to get enough fossils to build a skeleton, but maybe that's going to be 3 digs for that species rather than, 12. If that makes sense and hopefully answers the question. Oh my goodness, yeah, I mentioned before that I had a swollen gum, and that's why I hadn't been streaming lately. if I'm slurring my speech, then that's why. It's still a little bit present. I'm very conscious of it. Do the extra fossils disappear after you sort the dinosaurs, or is there a counter for each miscellaneous fossil you find? Okay, so you kind of have this, at least in the prototype, there's an inventory, and it's just like you have 10 of this miscellaneous fossil, and they're all treated as interchangeable. I think in the full version they will be a little bit more individual and distinct, because I'll have variations in material and color and size and stuff. So each one will be its own thing, and you'll be able to place all of those individually in your museum. Yeah, in the prototype it's just a number. So you found 56 poos, or in this case, hang on, what have I got at the moment? I have 685 miscellaneous fossils. If we jump into the Miss Fossil Viewer, I found 192 of these lovely shells, and 180 of these eggs, 146 of these trilobites, and 127 footprints, and only 40 poos. I guess that makes sense because the poos were a late one. Yeah, you could totally make a ship museum. That's 1000% something that I want to allow people to do. That's specifically like the kind of thing that I've had in my mind. And this idea of like, if you want to make a museum that's just nothing but stegosauruses because you love stegosauruses, that's cool. And I don't necessarily want to commit to it. And for clarity, something that I had intended to say when I was, when I first started, going over these plans and talking about this document, all of this stuff is subject to change. I think I am probably going to stick fairly closely to what I talk about here. But if partway along development I decide that it makes more sense to do something differently, then of course I'm going to do that. I'm not going to rigidly hold myself to my initial plans just because they were my initial plans. So yeah, none of this represents a commitment. But I have been thinking about the idea of um, I would really, because I'm going to have the ability to customize your avatar. Um, I can, if I've already got all the pieces, then I can just generate a bunch of NPCs, right? That all look different. And I kind of like the idea of having, um, if I stick to the same seed and stuff, and consistently generate the same NPCs, then I can give them their own like tastes and preferences, and so I could have people who only hang around your museum if you've got lots of carnivores, and I don't think I would necessarily surface that as something that to surface that to the player as something that they should be fixating on from a gameplay perspective, but it feels kind of nice, the idea of like there's someone who only shows up if you have a certain number of poo exhibits, um, yeah. Like I want the museum to feel like a space that belongs to you, that you build in a way that reflects your tastes, and um, you know, is the space where you express what it is that you care about, and what it is that you value. Like I think that's something that players really connect with a lot. And you like look at how people engage with like um, building their farms in Stardew Valley, or setting up their houses in Animal Crossing, or all that sort of stuff. People get really attached to that, and like people really tend to be engaged with and tend to be connected to um, the things that they make and the spaces that they create, and that's the entire value that I see the museum giving to players. Um, yeah, so another thing I would like to do is have the dig sites be non-rectangular. So they will be a rectangular base, but I want to be able to put um, things from the periphery and scenery stuff that intrudes upon that rectangular space to give it a more organic feel. So that might be that you've got your dig site here, but there's like a cliff that comes into the dig site, and you're like working on this, at the base of a cliff or something, and so we can have that, cut into the play space a little bit and give you like a non-square edge. And I think that's more interesting because the flat sides, the square edges that you end up with in Minesweeper don't represent interesting possibility space. Yeah, under the hood, it's still just like a square. Minesweeper's size, I'm trying to remember. I think the small size is portrait shaped, and the really big one is landscape. So like Minesweeper doesn't have at least as far as Windows Minesweeper goes, which is the one that everybody has played, right? I don't think it has like a consistent shape. But yeah, under the hood, it would have those tiles. It would have that shape, but then it would be made in a way where the tiles that intersected with the scenery object would have a special behavior where if you dug the tile next to them, it automatically clears that up to the scenery bit, so you see that coming down into the play space rather than have to carve out beneath it, or whatever. Oh yeah, Windows Minesweeper lets you do custom sizes as well. That's true. I think like the way that I'm working it at the moment, and the way that I expect to design and implement everything, I would allow people to set their own custom sizes if they're playing in practice mode, but I don't think I would do that as part of the normal gameplay. I think I would just stick with the easy, medium, and hard size bands, and leave those be whatever they're going to be. But I do like the idea of allowing that to be more organic, because as I said, like I think the flat edges don't provide you with interesting stuff. Like you're always like, the contours that appear around clusters of mines, or in this case fossils, are what makes the interesting gameplay. When you clear along a flat edge along a wall, that's not interesting. So removing some of those flat edges, I think, will allow more. Will increase the density of interesting stuff versus not interesting stuff. Not hugely, but a little bit. Yeah. We already talked about difficulty. So yeah, a dig site will primarily contain fossils from a single species, but has no guarantee that all of that species fossils will be found during a single dig. In fact, I'm kind of keen to guarantee that you can't get all of the fossils for a single species in a dig. And then there's going to be miscellaneous fossils, and I like the idea of having fossils from additional species as well. I'd like to expand the miscellaneous fossils to include like plants, other small animals and stuff, maybe insects, and then in addition to fossils, maybe have just like interesting bits of geology, like maybe you get like a cool geode or some gemstones or something, and if you want to make a gemstone exhibit or something in your museum, you can do that too. Like, just as a way of adding a little bit more variation to the miscellaneous fossil stuff. Because like, if the miscellaneous fossils are going to be how I pad out the extra content that I don't want to fill with entirely with dinosaur bones, then being able to spread that miscellaneous fossil stuff out broader, and including stuff like gemstones and other interesting rocks and things, I think that makes a lot of sense to do. I haven't really touched on that specifically here, but that's something that's been floating around the back of my mind. I also want to make it so that there are rarely, in rare occurrence, there are like a special full specimen, because like typically when we find a dinosaur, we generally, or fossilized creature of scale and small ones too, it's very rare for us to find something complete. Like, most of the sauropods we find don't have heads, and there are plenty of sauropods where the only thing we found is like a clavicle or some shin bone or something, like, and we extrapolate and derive what the rest of the creature must have looked like from that. So I like the idea of treating this. I like this idea of treating finding a complete specimen as something that's rare, and something to be, something exciting to treat as an event within the game. And then if you so like, if you find one of those, then it is the game encouraging you to play perfectly. So if you smash one of the bones or smash a fossil while playing there, then you lose the complete skeleton and they just become generic bones. But if you manage to uncover them without smashing any of them, and get like a complete full specimen, then it will remain as this kind of individual animal with unusual fossilization characteristics. I think I've talked. Hang on, let's bring up a good example. Is this the one that I'm looking for? Yeah. This specimen is wonderful, and there are plenty of others iconic specimens that I can think about. But I love this one. I think this one's like just such an amazing and powerful look at an ankylosaur. To be able to see the creature, because fossilized, in general, death is not good for bodies. And fossilized, like the sort of post-death decomposition, is not generally good for maintaining the integrity of a body, and then fossilization is often not good for maintaining the integrity of a body. To find something like this in the kind of condition that it's in is very impressive and very I don't know, to me it's very powerful. I look at this and feel very moved. We think about that specimen of the Velociraptor fighting Protoceratops. I think it's a Protoceratops. Pretty sure it's a Protoceratops. Or maybe it's a Basidicosaurus. I think it's a Protoceratops. But anyway, that's another kind of really iconic one. For those of us here in Australia, you may know of Eric the Pliosaur, who has been reclassified a bunch of times and is now Umunosaurus, which is like just a... So this plesiosaurs and then pliosaurs are oh my goodness, I don't remember my terms, but they're a grouping within that. But I think Umunosaurus is now no longer within pliosaurs. So what was once called Eric the Pliosaur, I don't think is technically considered a pliosaur anymore. But anyway, that was a specimen that was found at an opal mine, and it's this almost entirely opalized specimen. It's not like that Ankylosaurus where it's like one contiguous body. Like, it is separate bones that were kind of excavated and separated, for better or worse. But yeah, like this opalized plesiosaur skeleton known as Eric there was like this big fundraising thing that happened in the early 90s, I think it was, or late 80s, to buy and donate it to allow the Australian Museum to no, like the National Australian Museum, I think it is, to buy that from the people who dug it up and keep it in a museum, which is like, maybe it should just be donated. Like, maybe the state should claim that kind of stuff, but whatever. And maybe it shouldn't be down to the generosity of people to preserve that stuff. But yeah. Anyway, like that's another good example. I think a lot of people are familiar with the Berlin specimen, which is an Archaeopteryx. That's like a single, like a slab of stone with an Archaeopteryx skeleton, visible, sort of pressed into the squashed into its death pose. But it as well is like a really powerful and really well known thing, and those are the sorts of things that I would like these full specimens to be presented as. Yeah. Or maybe it gets entirely lost. Maybe you don't get to keep the individual bones if you smash one. You don't get to keep the remainder. I don't know. Like that'll be a balancing thing to work out later. So yeah, obviously, touching on the gameplay differentiation between Minesweeper and what this game does is, of course, the big thing is that if you smash a fossil, it's not game over. You're still presented with the opportunity to make the best of the remainder, which to me makes Minesweeper less interesting. Like, it's like you play perfect or you don't play, and that doesn't give you a chance to feel like you've recovered from a setback. Like, it doesn't give you a chance to feel like you've learned something. It's just, nope, game over. And since this is about, this game is about providing you with a more of a sense of progression and continuity between digs, it doesn't make sense to just give you an immediate game over from smashing something. Maybe in the case of the rare specimens, it does make sense to do something like that. But as far as general gameplay, no. And I've had people tell me that really changes their perception of the game and the feeling that they get from playing it as well, just from the prototype, and that's pretty cool to hear. Yeah. Obviously, something that I want to do in this full version that's not really doable in the prototype is so when you've cleared all of the surrounding tiles, then the tile with the fossil in it is considered excavated, and at that point it's added to your inventory. In the full version, I would like to allow you to leave a dig site partially done, and that might hang around on the map for another couple turns, so you can come back to it later. I do like the idea of allowing you to go, okay, well I found what I needed here, or it's dinner time and I want to stop. I'm just going to go back to the max screen, and that'll save that active dig in its current state for a little while, and I can come back to it later. I kind of like that idea, and also of not requiring you to finish out a dig if you're only after a particular fossil and you found it. Then if you want to stop at that point, that's fine. So yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, if you smash a bone, you just don't get it. So you can play. I actually find it kind of interesting sometimes to play to smash every fossil and try and get to the end with no fossils. And that's actually kind of hard. Like, if you don't know where they are, you've got to make sure that you don't accidentally dig around them, and sometimes when you do know where they are, digging one might excavate another one, so you've got to be like very thoughtful about the order in which you dig things. It's interesting. Could it be a problem that players just spam to click through? Look, if someone wants to play that way, then who am I to stop them? Like, I don't think that's rewarding, but if they find it rewarding, then it's fine. Yeah, I think just the game tells you when you smash something, and I think that's enough negative feedback. And also, like, giving you the option to leave, and not force you to play it through to the end, I think is another way of letting players who don't want to, who aren't engaging with that, the chance to step back from it. So yeah, I don't think that needs to be a problem. Yeah, another thing that I want to do that's not in the prototype is give some special abilities to the player. Yeah, I like another thing that it's sort of bouncing around in the back of my mind. Didn't really touch on it in this document because I didn't want to plant the seed or the expectation that that's something I'm going to do. But I kind of like the idea of, so let's say that I pick 200 places around the world to be the potential dig sites, and then you do a bunch of dig sites, and across the game you might go to one place twice. Like, I kind of like maybe the idea of taking you back to that same dig site that you previously did, but have you working at a lower level. Like, that might be interesting to like retain some information on spaces that you've visited, and if you've already visited them, then maybe you're working a little bit over and you can see the old dig site in the background or something, or maybe you're digging directly under and you're continuing to excavate space that might be familiar to you if you remember. But maybe that's an unnecessary level of detail and an unnecessary level of implementation complexity. That's something that I'm keeping in the back of my mind as maybe a nice to have if I have the scope to do it, but not something that I specifically want to commit to. But I do like the idea of giving players the opportunity to feel like they're forming a relationship with a particular place. But it might just boil down to, I want to have a bunch of different tile sets, and a particular region will use a particular tile set. So, you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm going back to this this Mediterranean space with this Mediterranean look and feel, or I'm going back to this desert space with this desert look and feel. Maybe that's enough. I don't know. We'll see. That's something to work out later. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to give players some like special abilities that are sort of limited use um, that might allow players to avoid a risky dig where they don't have all of the information that they need, or it might be able to um, help resolve or uncover or safely navigate something or quickly navigate something that they don't necessarily want to invest the time in. And so maybe that might be like a sonar thing, like at the beginning of Jurassic Park, they've got like that thing where they thump the ground, and then they've got do kind of like echolocation type thing on working out where the dense areas of the ground, the fossils are hiding within the like the mineralized fossils are hiding within the rock. Like that could be a kind of a fun thing to express through this sort of special ability thing, where instead of telling you where the fossils are, it just shows you the numbers in places that you haven't yet dug, and so that tells you a little bit more information, or maybe something that traces the contour of um, of where things are. Like I've got a bunch of possible ideas, but I like this idea of kind of going, okay, well, these are things that allow you to do stuff that you can't normally do. You only get to do, two of them per dig, or one of them per dig, maybe, or maybe you've got to do 2 digs before they recharge. Giving you the idea of like you've got a couple of special skills in your backpack that you can pull out and use when you feel like they're needed. So like the examples I've got here are a ping ability that temporarily reveals adjacent numbers within a particular radius. So that's the sort of thing that I was talking about then. Or an excavate ability that will clear empty tiles around a fossil such that it and any adjacent fossils will be excavated without harm. So like if you know that there's a fossil here, but you don't know how to uncover what's safe around it, then you could use this ability on that, and it'll just clear everything adjacent to that fossil and any adjacent fossils to it. That could be kind of fun. I'm going to need to do playtesting to work out, what kind of cooldowns they're going to have, or how frequently they should show up, or how many players should have access to, or whatever. But I can already imagine that is going to be a thing that needs to be a part of the game. Yeah, definitely not considering microtransactions. Returning to partially completed digs is being considered, but will be addressed late in development, so it may be dropped to reduce scope if needed. And that's something that I've put in this document a lot, is like anytime I mention something that's like that I'm uncertain about, I'm making it clear that that's like a thing that I can remove to reduce scope. And I think that communicating that I'm capable of downscoping in order to ship something is... Why is this not centered? Are the other figure... None of them are centered. Okay, well that's fine, I guess. Like communicating that I'm capable of downscoping is, I think... I don't know whether that specifically played a role in my application's success, but I felt like that was an important part of communicating my maturity as a developer, and communicating the level of experience that I have. Was demonstrating that I am capable of downscoping. And it also allows me to like sell the idea of things without committing to them, right? Like when it comes to pitching, a lot of it's about expectation management, and making sure that you're not... It's better to under commit and over deliver, right? Like in terms of presenting people with positive experiences. If you overcommit and underdeliver, then you for the same deliverable, if you've oversold it at the beginning and people's expectations are too high, they're going to be less happy with it than if you undersold it and their expectations were low and you came in above those expectations. And so like that's something that I'm very conscious of when I was writing this document and when I was putting together the application, was like, how can I go about presenting the project as something that is exciting, as something that is achievably doable, like with it by me, like ostensibly as a solo project, and also like because it's a tricky thing to balance, right? You want to make sure that it's exciting, but you also want to make sure that it's not unrealistic. And so riding that line, I think that having the ability to say these are cool ideas that I've got from a game designer perspective. I can think of all of these things. I can conceptualize all these things. I can understand the impact and role and benefits that they will bring. But from a project manager perspective, I also recognize that this is the sort of thing that I can cut to reduce scope. I feel like that's kind of an important thing to be putting into this sort of document. Even though this is really early, and as I said before, like everything that I'm talking about here is subject to change. Presenting the idea that particular features or particular things are uncertain from the outset is part of that expectation management process. So moving on to the assembly phase, which again, the idea is that we do some digs, and then we have something to assemble, and then we go back to do more digs. Like it's got its own like loops within loops is sort of the theme of how I'm imagining the relationship of the different phases to each other. So, hey Drew, how you doing? Yeah, this is my I'm calling it a concept doc, but yeah, by most definitions, it's going to be a game design doc, right? This was the core of my grant application, and I've been just going through. We're gonna be talking through all of this, and as part of going through this document, exposing what my plans are, and talking about how that's all progressing. We've just gone through gameplay for the map and dig phases. We can be looking at the assembly phase now. Its primary purpose is to be a reward for completing multiple digs, right? Like it's in my mind, as I said before, it's a bonus level. It has its own challenge and it has its own, discrete identity, but it's like it's the dessert you get from doing a bunch of main courses in your dig phases. Is my in my mind that's what it's all about. So I think for the purposes of making sure that everything is, I talked before about how I would like each dig site to potentially be able to have multiple species skeletons in them. I don't think it makes sense to ask players to identify which species a fossil is from within the assembly phase. So I think it's like it automatically makes sense to limit those to the current species, but still have the miscellaneous fossils and stuff to separate them out from. Because yeah, otherwise, like a femur looks like a femur. If I'm gonna be doing everything a little bit caricatured and not super realistic, like yeah, I don't think that I'm necessarily gonna have, and it's gonna be fairly low detail. I just don't think I'm gonna have the room to communicate enough information for players to be able to identify whether a bone is from a Triceratops or a Stegosaurus, right? Like, who knows? Could be anything. Could be either. If it's a skull with 3 horns on it, then it's probably not going to be a Triceratops, and if it's probably not going to be a Stegosaurus, and if it's like a pentagonal plate, like it's probably not going to be a Triceratops. But when it comes to a leg, there are paleontologists who would be able to identify that, but I think that your average player probably isn't going to be able to identify that, and then me as a game developer and me as an artist working within the constraints of the style that I'm going to go for, I don't think I'm going to be able to communicate that effectively. So it does make sense to limit that down to single species. By default, we've got the sort of Tetris style action mode that we talked about, and I talked before about how I find that an interesting juxtaposition against the dig phases sort of turn-based gameplay. We've got the stash thing will stay. If a bone touches the floor, it's going to be smashed and lost. If a bone is smashed while assembling a full specimen, the bone's position will remain empty, but will be sort of marked as filled, so you can build the rest of the skeleton without it, but you won't be able to display the full skeleton. Like, you'll be able to display the skeleton minus that bone. for I don't know, like that stuff is up in the air at the moment. Like maybe full specimens are automatically assembled and there's no risk there outside of the dig phase. Like I think that's a thing for me to decide later on in development. It's not like I have to do any specific or special implementation that represents a significant amount of work in order to do this, so I don't need to invest time in implementing before I make a decision. I can make the rest of the game and then see what contextually is needed. Um, um, but yeah, well, like the whole idea is that if you met like um, the rare specimens, like all the full specimens, are meant to be um, an invitation to play perfectly in the dig phase, and if you don't, you don't get it. So like that is already present. I just don't. I'm on the fence about whether it makes sense to extend that um, play perfectly requirement into the assembly phase or not. Oh yeah, actually, okay, sorry. I beg your pardon. It seems that I've introduced a concept here. This is either me skipping over. Oh yeah, okay, here we go. There's another thing about digs that I didn't talk about. So full specimens will just be like you get a sauropod that has a head with it as well. I don't know whether I'll aim for like realistic shortages of particular fossils and particular bones within a skeleton. I don't know. But yeah, so you can find a full specimen and you assemble that in the way that you would assemble a regular skeleton, but sometimes a full specimen will be a rare specimen, which will be that kind of like that ankylosaur that I showed earlier, or Erythopliosaur, or the Berlin specimen, where it's like presented within the context of the rock that it's found within. And so you don't build those, but you do build the full specimens. All right, I think I cleared that up. So there's like two types of full specimen. One is pre-built, and one is one that you build. There we go. Where were we? We already talked about all that stuff. Scrolly. Yeah, and I already mentioned the puzzle mode. So in addition to the sort of real-time action mode, there'll be this sort of only stuff only happens in response to your actions puzzle mode, which is a little bit more analog and less Tetrisy, and more like a regular jigsaw puzzle. And then, like, maybe if you try and place a bone 3 times in the wrong place, then it'll smash. So a little bit more forgiving as well for making mistakes. And I think that makes sense. Like, from the perspective of treating assembly as a bonus phase, having the option to, take on a challenge and do the action mode if that's what you want to do, sweet, do it. If that's not what you want to do, if you would rather do the puzzle mode, then that's fine too. But I don't feel like anybody who chooses to do the puzzle mode should be feeling lesser for having done that, right? I think it's about giving players the space to engage with the gameplay that they find engaging, And yeah, like as with the dig phase, you can leave at any time. Partially assembled skeletons can be completed later. And then we move on to the museum phase, which again is like you do digs to get fossils, you assemble fossils to stick in the museum. So it's about giving you somewhere to put everything that you found. Yeah. Once you've sorted out the missed fossils, they're taken out of the queue of stuff and are available for being placed in the museum. I'll probably have some options to allow for automatic museum placement. Like, again, don't necessarily want to commit to it because it does represent amount of work and it's something that I can cut if I run out of time. But I wouldn't mind having the option to automatically stick stuff in the museum, and that way anybody who just isn't interested in engaging with the museum side of things doesn't have to. But people who do want to like customize that space and make it reflect the things that they care about can. So yeah, the as I said before, the broad intention is to give you a space to reflect on the stuff that you've done, celebrate your accomplishments, and like act as a trophy case, but one that's like framed as being something that's providing an educational and cultural resource to the world at large. Like the thing about a trophy room is that it's for you, and you just like sit in there and pleasure yourself by by being in there. But the thing about a museum is like it's a space that you invite other people to come to, right? Like it's a space that you share things with other people. It's a resource. It's a learning place, like a center of learning and a center of discovery. And it's a way that you make the things that you find available to the world at large. And so I think that's a little bit more exciting than a trophy cabinet, right? It's a little bit more exciting than an achievement list. Um, and so, as I said before, you navigate the museum via third person. You like walk your avatar around the space and move things around, position things, place things, rotate things. In addition to the skeletons and the rare specimens and the miscellaneous fossils, I also want to give you the ability to put up informational display stands, um, posters that you can stick on the wall, or displays that you can stick on the wall. Um, some furnishings, maybe lights, maybe chairs, like rope barriers, maybe plants. Um, yeah, like a good range of museumy type fixtures and furnishings. Um, feel like to let you further, grow that space. Maybe you want to put like footprints on the like footprint stickers on the floor, like that kind of stuff as well. Totally doable, and in line with the sort of stuff that I want to do. I want the informational displays to be something that you can interact with. So you walk up to a thing and you press interact, and it'll bring up a UI that shows you the information that's on that informational display. And so maybe there's one that talks about, I don't know, the fossilization process and the different forms that can take. And so you'll be presented with a whole bunch of text that tells you about how fossilization occurs, the different types of conditions that can lead to different types of fossilization, and so and then at the end maybe have a joke. So it's sort of the inverse of the Bepedia in Hive Time. So where Hive Time has got like a whole bunch of in-fiction text that is funny and silly, and then at the bottom has a little B fact. I like the idea of having the inverse of that, where like you've got all of this type of content that you would find in a real museum, followed by something that's fun and funny. And so for anybody who just wants the jokes, they can open it up and scroll to the bottom. But for anybody who wants to read and learn that stuff, that's the central focus of the sort of displays within the exhibits that you can place down. And so they might be textual, they might be graphic. I don't mind the idea of also adding implementations for audio and visual presentations as part of the informational displays. So like, there are definitely cases where it would make sense to have, a video or an animation or something illustrating how a thing works, and allowing that to feel more interactive and more interesting. That's stuff that happens in real museums because it is engaging. Yeah, once, yeah, and where possible, like I like the idea of adding links to research papers, like I have in Hive Time, so that people can go and find more information if there's like something that they think is interesting, go out and get that deeper understanding of what's going on. And so yeah, like I also want to allow you to inspect the stuff that you like, the skeletons and fossils and things that you place in there, and I think that it'll just be a case of everything comes with it, with like a built-in informational display, and it'll be like that gives you information on where you found it, and when you found it, when it was added to the museum, that kind of stuff. I'm going to talk about it later, but if you're getting fossils from another country, then I would, or another region, then I would like to have like extra information about the relationship that allowed you to have access to that. That's interesting. There's a Sploper saying that there's a animated video in a museum in Victoria where some of the dinosaur sound effects are the same ones used by Doom for various monsters, which is it's interesting. This like probably like the pain sounds, I guess. But interesting. Yeah, yeah. And then we get on to something that's not in the prototype, something else that's not in the prototype, which is research. And I haven't really put a lot of detail in here because the idea is that the research phase is about the research phase is about mopping up some loose ends from a game design perspective. So if the purpose of the game is to do lots of digs and collect fossils and things, you're going to end up with, and you're not always guaranteed to get the fossils that you want, you're just organically going to end up with a surplus of some fossils. That's just how it works. If you have 2 of everything, and the last thing you need is a skull, and you get a skull, and you know that's fine. Then the remainder that you have left over means that if you have an equal chance of finding everything, then after doing some more digs, you're still going to have, like, you're going to be more likely to have less skulls because you've got a surplus of everything else, and that's likely to just organically carry forward and accumulate over time, just through the nature of acquiring things at different rates, but using them at the same rate, like consuming them at the same rate. So having and again, we come back here and we go, how many loose fossils do I have? I've got like 1195. If I go to build, I don't know, Deinonychus here, we see I've got 29 arms. I've got 80 of that miscellaneous fossil. I've got 14 tails. I've got 10 skulls. I've got 12 pelvises. 9 legs, 3 feet, 12 of this arm, 16 hands, 108 trilobites. Wow, we just sort that one. 17 neck bones, 3 feet, 11 bits of that tail, 19 of these, 5 ribs. Yeah, so like you can see that I've got tons of arms, but not so many feet. I don't know. I didn't mean to do that. Whoops. We'll talk about that later. So it would be nice to be able to do something with all those arms and not feel like I've got like just a glut of arms that I can do nothing with. Like I have a ton of useless arms, right? If I add a research system, I can make it so that you can spend some of those surplus bones on unlocking things like museum displays. And that like incentivizes you to dig up more of the species that you've already found, or at least gives you some value from doing that. And so if I kind of like treat the individual fossils as being interchangeable as far as research is concerned, then it'll be kind of like the heraldic cube in Diablo, where it's like, okay, you stick a bunch of stuff in here, you provide the ingredients for the recipe, and you get the other thing at the other end. And so in this case, it would be like 5 theropod arms, or you know, and that way you can use arms from anything, or you could go 5 bones from this particular species, and maybe that's going to be 5 arms because that's what I've got tons of. Just the idea of being able to, spend those surpluses on something that becomes useful is something that that I think will help minimize or at least stave off the less enjoyable aspect of having a huge surplus. Um, and so yeah, the idea that that each different display can have its own recipe that you need to care about, and I can like sort of thematically tie that to what it's about. So if you want to exhibit that's about the Cretaceous period, then maybe you need stuff from 5 different Cretaceous dinosaurs, and or yeah, five different species, but maybe there are 10 species in the entire game. So it's up to you to how you wanna do that. Um, um, yeah, I don't think I want to get super specific with the recipes. Like the whole point is to keep them generic and allow you to spend things how you want. Like, and TF2 has like this concept of scrap metal where you can turn specific things into generic resources. Um, and that's how most of the crafting recipes kind of work. Like scrap metal ends up becoming this like large component of um, most of the recipes in that. Um, whereas I think at this with the way that I'm likely to be framing the research thing, like it doesn't make sense for me to say, okay, well you got to turn any generic bones into bone meal, and then you need 5 bone meal plus a couple of specific things to do this recipe. I think it's better to just go, okay, this is a generic slot. You put whatever you want in there, rather than add like an extra layer of crafting on top of that, because it's a research system rather than a crafting system. Um, but yeah, I like the idea of like if you want to. The example I've got here is if you want to display on herbivores, you got to select fossils from a bunch of herbivore species. As another kind of example. And then yeah, the final number of unlockable things and that are in the game will have an impact on how the research costs are balanced. Like it doesn't make sense to even think about that right now until after everything else is implemented and I'm like able to see what the surpluses look like with first pass balancing. So for that reason, this aspect is kept intentionally vague because it's the bit that will shrink or grow or change shape to interface with and fit against the rough edges of the other aspects of the game. I think that the research will probably end up playing a role in unlocking additional regions as well. It's not something that I've really touched on here, but I feel like I'm gonna get players to pick a home location for their museum, and that to start with, you will only be able to visit dig sites in your home country, um, and then once you build a couple of skeletons, then opportunities to be invited to visit other places and participate in dig sites in other countries will be a thing that starts to happen, and maybe it will make sense to have research tie into that, so that gives you another opportunity to, or something ongoing to spend those surplus bones on. Because like if you're spending surplus bones on unlocking museum displays, then at some point you have unlocked everything, and then you get the surplus problem again. But we'll see how that goes. Like that's not something that I necessarily want to commit to or iron out just yet. So moving on to the next section of this document, I want to at least give a rough idea. See that I wrote this back in April, I think, and it was important to me. Part of the grant conditions that part of the terms of the grant is that I'm not allowed to use the grant money for anything that happened before the start date of the stuff that is being funded by the grant. So I can't like do a bunch of work and then pay myself for that work out of the grant. And I wanted to make sure that the grant was covering the entirety of production on, or yeah, sure, the entirety of production on this full version of the game. So I couldn't really do any of the work. And I did end up doing a little bit of concept art, just like a couple bits and pieces here and there. Um, but yeah, I because I didn't want to do any of the preliminary work. That if I was, if I was making something to pitch to a publisher, I think I would have done like a lot more work, and I would have maybe even gone so far as to make a vertical slice or something that could be seen as a vertical slice to expand the prototype into like do some art direction and do some of that sort of stuff to get a presentation for um, for the game that matches more closely what it's going to be. Um, but because I wanted to have the period that the grant was supporting be the entirety of the thing, I didn't really have the scope to do that. Um, but yeah, so we've got the map phase. The map phase is primarily focused on interacting with the GUI elements on the map. At the time that I wrote this, I was like, I haven't decided whether it's going to be 2D or 3D. That's something that I'm going to decide during development, and that's something that I've decided now is that I'm just going to go with the 3D map. Originally, I would have liked to have done both, but it was always a question of what's going to give me the best workflow to accomplish the things that I want to accomplish, and there are a bunch of awkward edge cases and concerns when it comes to putting 2D images onto 3D things. I'm not very good at 2D animation. I'm not very good at 3D animation, but I can do 3D animation, as maybe you've seen from some of my previous work. um, but with the time slider, it was really important to me that the map be 3D so that I could do proper interpolation. Like there's no like 2D interpolation tools that I have access to in Godot, as far as I'm aware, for like being able to create a map in 2D and animate it smoothly. I would have to create a whole bunch of frames, and that means creating and maintaining like a huge number of 2D images in order to get like a smooth animation. It's just, yeah, doesn't make sense to do when I've got access to 3D tools that I can use to create something that is very smooth and organic and doesn't have to worry about what happens when a continent moves around the edge of a seam. Or deal with, like, if I'm taking that 2D image and projecting it onto a sphere, what happens at the poles where it's like squishy and distorted, or at any other join point or distortion point. Like the idea of creating the animated map in 2D is just way too much work. And because I'm making this on my own, and I'm making it with the tiniest of budgets, I need to be able to prioritize what's doable. So the 3D map is what makes sense and what made sense to do there. So development will include experimentation with multiple historic tectonic plate positions for possible time slider, which may be dropped if scope is needed, to reduce scope if needed. I've done experimentation, and I've got, as I said, a workflow for doing that that's pretty simple, so I don't think I will drop that. I mean, I guess I can, but that'll be only dropped if it turns out that I don't have enough time to create all of the assets. But I think I've got a workflow that's pretty straightforward enough that I don't need to worry about that. As far as character customization goes, I want to let players, decide their clothes to some extent, decide their facial features to some extent, and maybe determine, maybe have a couple of different animation sets that they can pick from. I don't necessarily want to commit to that. Like, this is a space that's very easy for me to say, okay, we're scoping down. You don't actually get to pick individual components. You get to pick from a bunch of pre-made people. If that's what it comes down to, then that's what it comes down to. But ideally, I would like to be able to let you choose hat, hair, face, shirt, pants, shoes, gloves. Yeah, that's and like skin color and hair color, maybe eye color. You know, like that's the ideal. The what eventually will happen will probably sit somewhere in the middle, right? um, yeah, I don't know if I've necessarily been mentioning it as prominently as I should have been, but the idea is that the avatar that you pick will be walking around the outside of the dig space during the dig phase. They'll be climbing up and down the scaffolding and carrying bones up so that they can fall down and stuff during the assembly phase. Like the avatar will be present pretty much everywhere. Um, I don't know about the map phase. We'll talk about that in a bit. But the idea is that the avatar will be present, very present throughout the rest of the game, um, so that it's bringing home that it's you that's out there, finding and assembling all these skeletons. Um, yeah. So in order to explain the scope better, I've sort of said here customizations will include skin color, choice of hair types, hat types, shirt types, pant types. Initially, the number will be 3 of each, with the intention of for hat, shirt, and pants, with the intention of expanding those if scope allows. So, in addition to saying these are things I'm willing to drop, I've also got a bunch of things I can go, okay, well, this is the bare minimum, but you know, if there's room, makes sense to add a few extra hats because like they're easy to make. I want to try and create a character model that is fairly gender agnostic, and give some, you know, and not limit things. Like if you want to do like a dress on someone with a beard, I don't care. Like, why not do whatever you want to do? Like, there's no reason to limit anybody. It's like you got to put effort to put those limits in. Just why would you waste your time on doing that? It's yeah, it's like it's not an efficient use of your time, and it's also like not a useful restriction to give to your players. Like it diminishes your players the space that you're giving players to express themselves. It's just like yeah, why would you do that? There might be cases where you go, oh, okay, well like we can't use this hair with this hat because this is tall hair and the hat needs to sit on it, and you know, it doesn't work out. So there may be cases where I need to limit things, but in general, like I'll do my best to not. And I think depending on how things go and on what, because I haven't done any of this sort of stuff before, like maybe it would make sense to add some kind of additional boolean mesh that's a part of a hat that just cuts out the hair that it would have intersected with. And so it's like, you know, you've got maybe you've got I don't know, maybe you've got a hat like this one here, and hair like this one here, and it's got like a box above here, and that kind of covers the shape of the brim, and the top of the head, and basically anywhere that the hair intersects with that box, that hair just doesn't exist. Everything that it doesn't intersect with the box is where it is. And so you put the hat on, you got like the bottom half of the hair below the hat brim still visible, everything above just has disappeared. If that ends up being easy enough to implement, then that's probably a good way to solve that problem. If it doesn't introduce performance concerns. Yeah, the idea is that I don't intend to have separate male and female meshes. In my mind, it's better to just have a generic body and let people decide what they want. But I've said, like, you know, that as far as the budget is concerned, and we'll talk about the budget after I get through this document, whether that's today or whether that's next week, we'll see how we're going for time. But I did have a budget as well. So yeah, whether I felt like it made sense to budget for doing male and female, like separate male and female skeleton models. Sorry, but the intention is to make a one gender agnostic model and just have spare spare budget. Um, yeah, if a single model doesn't work, then I'll have the comfort and safety to know that that doesn't push me over budget or push me over scope. It makes sense to over allocate in that case so that I have the flexibility to make the decision as it's needed later on. But my gut says that I can use a common gender ambiguous base mesh to work with and not worry about it. If I do separate characters, then they're all going to use the same rig and same animations. Because otherwise I'm just making way too much extra work for myself. So yeah, during the dig phase, we're going to need animations for them walking around the space, turning, looking, maybe pointing, crouching. I want to give them like just a level of presence where they seem to be reacting to the gameplay that's going on in the dig phase, and maybe that might involve them pointing at the thing that was just dug up. Maybe it might involve them, walking over to somewhere that's safe to dig as like maybe a little hint or something. Like, I don't necessarily want to commit to doing that, but yeah, like it does make sense to have like a couple of walk to this point, look at the dig space, and be visibly looking at the dig space. Maybe crouch, maybe stand. As sort of a minimal set of animations I'm going to need for that. I'm also going to need something to sort of acknowledge when a fossil has been excavated successfully. So that might be some kind of arms in the air, jumping up and down type happy thing, and some kind of equally sad or frustrated animation when a fossil is being smashed. During the assembly phase, I'm going to need animations for climbing up and down the scaffolding. Again, I like the idea of pointing and directing the player's attention towards particular stuff. Makes sense. I don't necessarily want to commit to it, but I kind of like the idea of allowing the player to like high five their avatar with the mouse cursor or something. That could be kind of fun if I've got the scope for doing that sort of thing. We'll need animations for like carrying a fossil and picking a fossil up off the fossil queue, or like throwing or handing the fossils into the play space. Again, celebratory animation for successfully placing a thing, sad animation for destroying a thing. We can probably repurpose stuff from the dig space as a way of keeping things down. And then for the museum, we're going to need walking, running, again with the looking, again with the pointing, again with the standing, crouching, probably sitting. It will make sense to try and work those in a way, or design the other stuff in a way so that they can all be repurposed and use a single set of animations. So I want to work to keep this as minimal as possible, because the smaller I keep it, the more I can use of my animation budget to make extra stuff that I haven't thought of, or cool things that might be fun. So I want to reuse as much as possible. I want to do as much as possible with as little as possible, which was my mantra for Hive Time's development as well. So for fossils, they will aim to be accurate to the point that a species might be identifiable, but stylized to reduce detail and fit with the rest of the game's look and feel. The lower the level of detail, the less work that I have to do, and I need to be conscious about how much of a workload I'm taking on. If I want to have a dozen species in the game, that's a certain amount of work. If I want to have 24 species in the game, that's a large amount of work. Like, it makes sense for me to minimize the amount of overhead of each individual species, so that at the point where I'm deciding how much spare scope I've got to add, or to add more in, or which ones I have to cut or whatever, like the easier it is to make a species, make the assets for a species, the more I'll be able to put in. The more that I'm able to put in, the stronger the game will be. Like, that's that's the be all and end all. Is like the more species there are in the game, the more game there is. Because this is the central thing. Like everything is about these skeletons and the so I do need to ideally make them as easy to make as possible. So each species is going to be like a single model and rig, but it'll come with a set of poses. So this is one pose where it's kind of like got the head down, tail up. There might be another pose that's like laying down, or another pose that's like rearing up or something. So having a bunch of different poses allows me to give you something different to do in the assembly phase when you're making the same skeleton again, right? If you've got to make 5, if you've decided that you want to have 5 stegosaurs in your museum and you're making 5 stegosaur skeletons, it would be nice to give you 5 different experiences of assembling a stegosaurus, right? So yeah, that variation feels like it's important for making sure that the game doesn't get too monotonous. Is some of the budget going to be into researching real dig site locations, dinosaur species, or is that existing knowledge that I have? I have budgeted some research, but I am primarily going to be leaning on existing knowledge that I have and existing resources that I already am aware of and have already found. So when it comes to, let's take the map for example. Yeah, I need to take a drink. I've been talking a lot more than I usually talk. Goodness. What was I saying? Yeah, so take the map for example. I have a couple of books of my own that show Pangea and various other phases of tectonic movement of the Earth. There are some websites that I already know about that have similar resources. My plan is to look at all of these resources and then do my own artistic interpretation. Because I already have access to those resources and have them on hand, I don't need to allocate any research time to doing that. And for the most part, dig site locations, well, it's not necessarily dig site locations. Like, I don't feel like I need to go, okay, this is this specific dig site in the world. I think I'm gonna just put it more down to region. Like, I don't think it would make sense to get any more specific than, I don't know, like an area of space as big as Tasmania. I think I would just generically consider that one place, right? So if we're looking at South Australia, maybe there are 2 regions within South Australia that could be distinct dig sites, but the idea being that there are, as far as the fiction of the game is concerned, there is an infinite number of possible dig sites in South Australia, and they happen to be divided between north and south of the state. In terms of how that's visualized, because like otherwise, like how granular do I get? There is a website that I am aware of, and I guess I can, which I will use again as a guide. I don't want to like use the data. What I want to do is learn from this and then create my own artistic interpretation. So if we look at just Mesozoic animals, here is we'll zoom in. Is it going to zoom in for us? Yeah, there we go. We can see here. Yeah, I have limited this to Mesozoic. So this is Mesozoic animals. This isn't necessarily. Oh, sorry, it's not just animals, it's plants as well. So I could limit this to, is it this one? Taxa browser. Yeah, Animalia. So I can just like limit it to Animalia. No? How do I, yeah, okay, click on that to limit it to that. Okay, so that gets rid of all the plants. Right, which has cut down significantly the amount of stuff that's here. But I have access to, and I have on hand, resources like this that I can look at to learn from and get an idea. And so in this case, like looking at North America here, look at this huge swath through the Midwest. Is this the Midwest? I don't know. Or the central. I don't know. I don't care about American geography, so maybe the Midwest is like just this area in here. I don't know. Maybe there's none in the Midwest. But anyway, we can see like this huge concentration here. I think I would go like, okay, well, there's a dig site in this state, whatever this state is. There's a dig site in California. Let's pick a state that I do know the location of. And I can just put the marker anywhere in California and assume that the species that have been found in California will be found there. Like I don't need to get more specific than that, I don't think. Because you're dealing with things at a global scale. You know, if you're dealing with like a large place like Western Australia here, like maybe it makes sense to divide that up into quadrants, and it's like you only find the species that are found around in this sort of south quadrant are only going to be found here, or stuff that's only been found up here is going to be found here. You know, but it doesn't really, like for Tasmania, it doesn't make sense to try and divide that up into a whole bunch of different spaces. I don't think. You know, like Madagascar can probably just be one location so far as that goes. But yeah, so far as the research that I need to put into goes, I will need to do time inspecting and interpreting and learning from this, and I will need to do time creating my own artistic interpretation of the data that's here. But it's not like I have to go visit a whole bunch of libraries and work out where to find this information. I've already got access to it, right? And this is cool as well, because you can like divide it down into period. You know, if we want to just look at Cretaceous stuff, or we want to just look at Dinosauria. Donk. Then we can say, okay, well these are just the dinosaurs from the Cretaceous. Hang on, that's not a dinosaur. There we go. Yeah. So I have the ability to filter and limit this data to stuff that I care about. Obviously I'm going to have more than dinosaurs, but I want dinosaurs to be the focus. So I can, you know, I've got access to resources that mean that I don't have to do a lot of research. Oh, I know. I guess I can drop a link in chat for anybody who wants to look at that. But yeah, so that's. I think the majority of what I want to do is going to fit within those kinds of bounds. When I was younger, I wanted to be a paleontologist, and this is me living that dream. And so while a lot of the knowledge that I have is likely out of date, I have enough context and enough familiarity to know how to navigate and find current and contemporary information. So the amount of research that I need to do is a lot smaller than someone who is less initiated, if that answers that question. Also, hello Gems Tones, welcome. Thank you for your kind words. Well, very cool data. That's not my data, so I guess I don't need to thank you. But yes, very cool website. I am very glad that I have access to that kind of data. It is very cool that people have put that stuff up and made it available. So yeah, I wanna have variation in poses, both from the perspective of giving you some variation during the assembly phase, but also from the perspective of you go, oh, I like Stegosaurus, but I don't really like the pose that it's in at the moment. Maybe I can go and dig up another one that'll be in a different pose and replace the exhibit in my museum with that pose instead. So I think that's kind of cool. Cool way of inviting. Come on, go away. I should probably just close my my email program, and then we won't see any notifications from it. Yeah, so in the prototype, I manually broke the skeletons up into chunks that were individual meshes. So as like one mesh is this leg right up to the hip. But I think what I want to do is change how that works and make it so that every discrete and individual bone, every vertebra, it's going to be fun, is its own discrete mesh, its own separate model. And then that way I can programmatically do the chunking in ways that, well, maybe not programmatically, I don't know, maybe it'll make sense for me to do this as part of content authoring, but I don't want to be limited to the chunks that make sense for a particular pose. Like maybe for this, for this downward pose, it makes sense to have this leg and the clavicle and stuff all as one piece, because from this angle we see it like that, and but maybe there's another angle or another pose where it makes sense to have this leg attached to the front half of the rib cage, because that makes it more readable from this different angle, this hypothetical different angle. So I want the flexibility to be able to reuse the same model and just have a different pose for the armature to do that. And sort of controlling, having the chunking happen at runtime rather than as something that I've done in Blender before exporting, feels like the right way to go. But it also, as I have noted here, thanks past me, is that the smaller the chunks, the more work there is to do during the assembly phase. So, and I guess the more work there is to do in the dig phase as well, because you're gonna like dig up more chunks, right? So I could make that like a difficulty option, so you can go, okay, well I wanna do like the easy mode of the Stegosaurus, or I want to do the hard mode of the Stegosaurus and have like the different chunk sizes. But this raises another kind of like implementation question, which is like, if I do vary the chunks per pose, how do I show that during the dig phase? Like, I don't necessarily want to go, when you pick up when you dig up a stegosaur skull, it's not the stegosaur skull for a particular pose, it's a generic stegosaur skull that you can use for whatever pose you're currently building. I think you should be locked into whatever the current one is that you're in the middle of, and then everything that you have will just fit with that. So I need to work out how to align that, how to smooth that, how to communicate that to players. I got a couple ideas, but that's sort of still up in the air, and that's something that I will nail down as I progress through this early part of development. Yeah, I'll need to rewrite new scripts and new export stuff for handling the rig and that stuff, because like in the prototype there's no animation, like it's all pre-posed and the poses are baked. But I think that it makes more sense for me to have one rig that I can put in a bunch of different poses rather than have 5 different complete assembled or 5 different Stegosaurus worth of poses, worth of bones for each, like one for each pose, one set for each pose. Like, yeah, it's just like a whole bunch of assets to maintain. Whereas if I just export one thing and have the armature control it, like all of the different chunks share the same armature, and the armature gets put in a particular pose, and that means that everything's where it needs to be. That's just like less assets, less stuff for me to maintain as a developer. So I've said here that the minimum number of species will be 6, with the intention of expanding the count as much as the scope allows. The initial set's going to be chosen to give like as broad a geographic, temporal, and family distribution as possible. But there are a bunch of specific candidates that I've already considered. I would like to prioritize Australian dinosaurs, or groups that Australian dinosaurs belong to. Um, but I would also like to prioritize, you know, things that people know and things that will resonate with them. So like, gotta have Stegosaurus because everyone loves Stegosaurus. Gotta have Triceratops because everyone loves Triceratops. Gotta have Tyrannosaurus because everyone loves Tyrannosaurs. You know, yeah, that's sort of the angle that I'm coming from. Ideally, I would like to do. I don't know. Ideally, I would like to do 50 species. Ideally, I would like to have 100. But yeah, I need to like, again, pitch small, talk about expanding that as scope allows, and then sort of see how things pan out. We talked about miscellaneous fossils already. I talked about wanting to bring plants in there as well. I like the idea of having amber with inclusions. When something is inside amber, that's called an inclusion. So your mosquitoes trapped in amber, kind of thing would be nice to have, and that's a nice blurring the boundary between that whole kind of like gemstone and fossils and stuff. Yeah, yeah, and that, like, by expanding that out more as well, I can try and keep that appropriate for the geography and the era of the dig site as well. So I'm like, if you're in the Triassic, you're going to find like Triassic plants. If you're in the Cretaceous, maybe you'll find some. I think there were like some early flowering plants at the end of Cretaceous. I need to double check that. I guess there's some research that I need to do. But yeah, like not try and mix those up. Like try and keep it relevant to the stuff that you're picking up. Yeah, Species Packs as DLC is definitely something that I'm considering as well. Doesn't really make sense to lock anything in stone or plan any of that sort of stuff out until I'm at a point where I'm deciding how much I'm going to fit in. But yeah, expanding with post-release content, definitely something that's sitting in the back of my mind. Yeah, and yeah, like that's how I like to develop as well. Like I like to make the smallest version of the thing made with the largest version of the thing in mind, and developed in a way that makes expanding into that larger space easier. Yeah. I also want to make a bunch of different materials and finishes for fossils. So I like the idea of like assigning what kind of material a bone is going to have or a fossil is going to have at the time that you dig it up. And then when you're assembling stuff, you end up with like a mismatch, from different, you get half of a Stegosaurus here and half of a Stegosaurus there, and half of it's a little bit pale and half of it's a little bit darker, and that's fine. And that will help the full specimen stuff feel special as well. Yeah, let the full specimen stand out as being unique within the space when you put them in the museum next to ones that weren't full, And then I think rare specimens will probably have like particular finishes and styles. So like they'll like we talked about Eric, the pliosaur. I guess Eric would be a full specimen, but there'll be a bunch of sort of like special things like opalized stuff and other rare types of mineralization or rare types of fossilization. And again, like in terms of giving examples of rare specimens, we talked about the Berlin specimen. That ankylosaur that we saw is the Suncorn nodosaur. The fighting dinosaurs is the Velociraptor and Protoceratops that I mentioned earlier. Dakota is a hadrosaur, I think, from memory. which has like a whole lot of like really visible skin and body detail. It's like really cool. And then Eric the Pliosaur is the opalized Immunosaurus that I mentioned earlier. And so yeah, I think drawing upon those kinds of specimens as references for what some of these rare specimens should look like, I think makes a lot of sense. So the dig phase is going to be like a, again, stylized caricature of a real dig site. Flags and grid lines are like things that exist in real dig sites, or at least have analogs. They're not, usually the markers, flags that get put on fossils that have been found. They get put on things after they've been identified, like after the location has been identified, and often they don't look like the little triangle flags that I've got. Usually grid lines are marked out with string because it's non-destructive, but it's fine. But it is nice that there are some of these like analogs between what's relevant to gameplay for Bonesweeper and what's actually present in dig sites. I'm going to be doing some experimentation, as I said. Like, maybe I will try like the string thing, or try and do like more realistic flags or labels. I tried doing that for the prototype, but it just wasn't readable. Like it was much more difficult to communicate what was going on compared to having like beveled edges on the tiles and having like that organically provided grid for us. Like that just made a lot more sense. And the like pokey outy triangle flags are just a good silhouette. It's easy to see, easy to read, easy to interpret. But I will experiment again with more realistic stuff once I settle on the kind of style that everything's going to have, because I can sort of try and lean into whatever stylistic conventions that I have to see whether or not I can come up with interpretations of those things that are more readable. But if not, then I'll just stick with the beveled edges on tiles because it works, right? Yeah, and the idea is that the ground tiles will show some kind of strata on them. These are their prototype models. Yeah, I won't keep these. These will go. Dug non-fossil tiles will contain relatively flat floor, upon which adjacency numbers can be projected when appropriate. I haven't worked out an implementation for that in the prototype. The numbers are actually 3D meshes that I float above the ground. They don't cast shadows, so you just like see them floating in space. But I would kind of like to project them and find a nice way of making them more readable from different camera angles and stuff. And I would like to not use meshes, because when it comes to localization, I can't make different models for every language, right? For every number system, or yeah, every new yeah. What if different languages have different numerals? I don't want to have to create millions of meshes or multiple copies of stuff. Like I would rather have a font handle that for me than have to have assets to manage. So I need to do some work there. And then yeah, like I like what I did in the prototype, where we've got like this low-lying floor, and then the stuff with the fossils in it is a little bit higher, or smashed, whether it's smashed or not, is a little bit higher to like give like visual relief off the floor. Like I think that's nice, and it kind of almost reflects kind of what happens in the real world, like at actual dig sites, where you excavate around the fossil to uncover it, and you end up with these kind of like these large fossils half emerging from the ground. Like it's a cool visual. Yeah, I don't think I'll stick with this whole like cartoon femur sticking out of the ground. I'm open to the idea of trying to represent the actual chunks that you found there. But I don't know. That's something that I'm on the fence about. Yeah, so the intention is that excavated files will show the actual fossil chunks described in the previous section. But if the chunking process and distribution of chunks makes that difficult to achieve during development, then something similar to what's going on in the prototype, showing like a generic fossils will be used. And my gut feeling is that that will make the most amount of sense, because that A is easiest to implement, and B gives me the most amount of flexibility when it comes to doing different things. But yeah, we'll see. The area around the play space is going to be like going to have tools and chairs and tents and trailers and tarps and bags and all that sort of stuff to help communicate that it's an active dig site with like real dig site type stuff. The idea is that I'll have like a library of models, and I can put just a handful in and just randomly pick a bunch for every time you go to a dig site, and we'll just pick a random different bunch, so that you're seeing some variation there. I mentioned before that I want to have like cliffs and things. I wouldn't mind having rivers and boulders and other geological structures to make those spaces feel more organic. We mentioned the player's avatar is going to be walking around the outside of the space. I want to have different environmental variations, so like different biomes, I guess, to help convey different geographic locations. The initial set's going to be 4, which is going to be, I'm going to like work that out over time, but I'll probably have like some kind of generic rock, something that is sort of sandy desert, something Mediterranean, something snowy, and maybe some sort of savanna type thing. These feel like the right directions to go in, but I would like to expand that up. We'll see. I've been doing experimentation over the past couple of days, looking at how I can minimize the amount of work I have to do in order to create a reasonable level of tile variation. And so the easier I make that, the more comfortable I can feel doing more tile sets for different biomes. So I also would like to have some weather effects that can show up every now and again. So that might be the shadows of clouds passing over the play space, or it might be rain falling, or it might be snow, or it might be little dust clouds or something that come along, or leaves blowing past in the wind or something. Maybe this could provide some extra difficulty by obscuring the play space a little bit, but that's not the primary purpose. The primary purpose is to just make things feel a little bit less generic, I guess, or a little bit less samey, a little bit more dynamic while you're playing. You never seen pictures of a dig site in snow? Yeah, like I haven't either, and like nobody does digs in winter usually. Like everybody does stuff in summer because that's when you can maximize the daylight hours and maximize the effective labor. And like anywhere that it snows, there's not a lot of daylight usually. But we've found dinosaurs in Antarctica, and I imagine that there was snow there. So those are things that I can research and look up for examples of how that's going to be presented. But I don't feel like I need to be too bound to reality there. What I want to do is make sure that I'm showing and communicating that dinosaurs are found in lots of different places, and that it's not just Death Valley. Right? Like, yeah, I want to like convey the idea of geographic diversity, rather than just show you the stuff that you see in movies. And if that means doing some unrealistic things, then that's fine. I don't mind. Yeah, and each dig ability, like their special abilities I talked about, will probably need their own particle effects as well. But yeah. So following along again, the assembly phase, I want it to look like a lab or a workshop in which skeletons would be assembled, drawing inspiration from real life workshops and labs and museums. you know, and universities. We already talked about stuff. I don't need to go over anything that's already in the prototype. I kind of want to light things so that there's like specific and conscious emphasis on the play space, and like anything that's in the background is meant to be less distinct and pushed into the background. Probably through lighting, maybe through depth of field. I don't know. I'll have a play and see what makes the most amount of sense. Yeah, I'll need to come up with some nice nice bins for the stash and sort buckets. But those as diegetic UI are something that I want to have for sure. You know, expanding on what's in the prototype, but making the presentation a bit more exciting. Yeah, there's not much to talk about for this section for the assembly phase. Yeah, I want the museum to like just be this blank, featureless environment, and it's all about the stuff that you put in it. Yeah, there's like I don't mind the idea of letting the player change the walls, change the light color, the lighting intensity and stuff. Like give the player as much control as makes sense over the museum, so that they've got you know, able to present that in whatever way makes sense to them. I really like the I really like this Triceratops. It's a very cartoonish Triceratops, and this sort of, I guess it's Tyrannosaurus. I enjoy those. In fact, I like this Pteranodon as well. These are good sketches, good scribbles. It's tricky because the assembly phase is fairly fast paced, right? So there's not going to be a lot of time for the player avatar to be doing things. If they're also carrying the bones up to the top of the screen for them to fall down. Yeah, I don't know, but that could be a fun thing to do. Maybe that makes sense. In some cases, like as like a thing that can happen to relieve the monotony is they stop doing the carrying, that starts happening automatically, and then they walk off, get a new bin, push it into place where the old bin was, and then take the old bin away, and that way you're never without a bin. Yeah, could be an option. Yeah, or we already talked about some of the assets that I'd need for you know, display cabinets and informational display stands and lamps and chairs and whatever else. I did some very quick sketches of things, what they may look like. It's all very rough. I did this like, I don't know. I remember just going, I need something to stick in this document here. I'll just spend 10, 20 minutes scribbling stuff and just quickly scan that. Is it in this sketchbook? It might be in this sketchbook. No, it's in this one. I'll grab it. There might be some other treasures in here. I have not looked. Have I considered sharing? Yes, I have. And this is another space where I'm kind of like, I got plenty of big ideas, but from an expectation management perspective, I don't really want to get too deep in them. But yeah, so the prototype already allows you to have multiple player profiles on the same computer. I think I can definitely say that I'll let you visit other players' museums on the same computer, and then allow you to imagine for yourself what that means in terms of where things may go from there. Here's a landscape sketch that I drew. You probably can't see it. Yeah, here's that sketch. Hang on, if I jump over to birds, you see that bigger? There we go. That's that sketch, hooray! But yes, I was going to see if I'd sketched anything else in here that was relevant, but it seems not. It seems like I just went, oh hey, I need to have an image for this document. I better quickly scribble something, which I did. Yeah, so I'm going to have like at least 3 different types of informational displays. So wall-mounted stuff like posters and things. These kinds of stands like either this sort of thing that's going to sit in front of the skeletons, or something more freestanding like this, and vertical stuff like that. So 3 different types. Maybe some larger things, like you ever go to a museum and they got those like massive. Oh, you're still in bird view. Thank you. I am very good at forgetting to deal with that. You ever go to museums and they got like a sphere, or a hemisphere, like half a sphere, a dome type thing, that's set into a counter, and it's freely rotating, and inside is some kind of medium, a fluid or some gases or something, probably gases, and you can spin the dome around, and it will create vortices within the gases that are inside the underneath the dome, as like part of exhibits that talk about air currents and weather and stuff. I like the idea of like maybe also having some of those sorts of like really big interactive displays like that. Could be kind of fun. And so the content for all of the display types will just show up as like a 2D overlay that comes up over the top of your 3D representation of the museum. Yeah. I was going to say something, but I don't know what it was. Doesn't matter. Initially, the minimum number of displays is going to be 2 for each type, for each dinosaur species, plus 1 of each type for each period of the Mesozoic era. Again, with the intention of expanding as allows. So that's going to be like Stegosaurus gets a default one and an unlockable one. Well, hang on. It gets the one that it comes with, which is probably going to be a floor stand, and then another unlockable floor stand, and then a pair of posters, and a pair of other ones, and a pair of like large interactive ones, which might be like, here's a large thing that's meant to be the skin texture of this animal reproduced in rubber or something. Those kinds of things, touchy-feely things. But I guess when you interact with it, it'll bring up an overlay, with some descriptive stuff of that. And then minimum number of furnishing items is going to be 2 of each type, with the intention of expanding. Yeah, and the museum may also be populated by NPCs using the same model as the player avatar with randomly assigned customization options, which I already mentioned earlier. Looking at audio, I'm going to try and repurpose existing Hive Time and Bonesweeper like sounds from the prototype as well, particularly for UI. But I am going to need to go out and probably record. Well, not go out. Probably stay home and record. If you keep an eye on the further down, the little slideshow that's going on every now and again, it will come past the photo of all of the stuff that I used to record the sounds for the Bonesweeper prototype sitting on my bench. So I just recorded that in my kitchen, and yeah, I'll need to do some more stuff. But the intention is that I will want to leave room to make sure that like the intention is to keep the oral spaces light and make sure that the text-to-speech stuff never has the opportunity to be drowned out by things, and that the UI sounds are always going to be readable. So there's not going to be a lot of environmental sounds. I'd like to have some, but not enough to like really significantly occupy the sound space. Um, yeah, I'll probably need some footstep sounds for the NPCs walking around, sounds for like digging, and sounds for assembling and stuff. I'll start by using the prototype sounds and then replace them as needed. For music, I'm probably not going to use the music that we're listening to at the moment that you will probably find annoying and repetitive is the generated music system that I wrote for the prototype. Um, it generates like a new melody every time you visit a new dig or every time you start a new assembly. Um, and since I'm not interacting with it, it's just playing the same one on repeat. Um, this was a fun thing to do, but I think I would rather have like actual composed music for the full version. But I, for the purposes of this, I've said that I'll make that decision later. But I am budgeting to have composed music. And so the conceptually, I would like the dig music to evoke a sense of patience and a sense of thoughtfulness and a sense of reflection, which is why I kind of went for this sort of almost wind chime-esque but more rhythmically structured feel for the prototype. But I think I would probably not take this route with composed music for the full version. I think it would probably be very different, and may be tailored or tuned to the specific biome. So that means I'll probably want to have some dig music for each tile set that I have. So I need to be conscious about how I'm using that and how I'm expanding that over time. I would like the assembly phase to be a little bit more hectic to reflect the faster pace of the gameplay there. The map phase music I want to give a sense of impending adventure. Not super overtly, I don't want it to feel like a disappointment when you actually get to the dig site and you get the more quiet music. But yeah, I would like it to add a sense of anticipation. And have, yeah, as I've said here, tonal range defined by the rest of the game's music. And then the music in the museum, I would like to have a sense of like fascination or inquisitiveness, and curiosity, but while still being very distinctly background music. And then for the research phase, I don't know, we'll just reuse some other music, right? Kind of, it's not notable or significant enough to warrant its own thing. Yeah, so as far as I mentioned text-to-speech stuff, I would like to make sure that the full game, like the prototype, is entirely playable via text-to-speech. And yeah, that will mean that the museum might need to function a little bit differently. I will have to create like some alternative gameplay for that, but I think I can lean very heavily on for everything else stuff that I've done in the prototype. I will probably use more like audio cues to convey stuff than I am in the prototype. Like in the prototype, everything is text-to-speech because it's easier for me to just type some text and have the computer say it than it is for me to go and record something new. But I think I will still try and make use of the descriptive help button. So in the prototype, if you press a / key or a question mark key, it'll tell you all of the current, or all of the information that's relevant to the current gameplay state. So it will, in assembly mode, it'll tell you. I think it'll tell you about how much of the skeleton you've assembled, and it'll tell you how many bones you've smashed, and just like give you an update on where things are at. And same in the dig phase, it'll tell you about what's going on in a broader scope, so you can get an idea of what's happening. And I really like that. Like in addition to just where is the current what is the current tile that we're focused on, and what are the current adjacent tiles doing, like to be able to press a button and say more holistically where are we at in the game right now, is quite nice. And yeah, part of this I wanted to highlight was that I am within a community of people who are making audio games and blind accessible games, and I'm making use of feedback and discussion there to better improve the stuff I'm doing, because like I'm not vision impaired, and as much as I enjoy playing the prototype with just text to speech and not looking at the screen, like I find that interesting and fun, I'm still not the right person to make a solid call on what's a good fit and what's not. So it's important for me to work with people who actually have those needs and not just assume. So we talked about the map a little bit earlier. This was a very quick mock-up that I made in the hopes of not presenting any, again, under promise, over deliver kind of thing. I wanted something that just felt like really rough and minimalist in how it's presented. It's going to be a little bit more exciting, as you may have seen from some of the stuff I shared over the past week. Yeah, so the idea is that you've got access to the map. This is going to be a globe. Do I have the 3D map? Yeah, so it's more of this sort of thing. And the idea is that you mouse over one of the dig sites, or you click and drag to pan around, and you mouse over and it will tell you a little bit about the dig site. It'll give you some icons for what species might be found there. I said before that those are probably going to be question marks if you haven't discovered that species before, and that way it'll allow you to focus on chasing things that you care about, or chasing things that you don't know about. You'll have the opportunity to make some informed decisions about where you're going and why you're going where. I like the idea of letting you cycle through the species that you have fossils for that you haven't completed yet, so that you can go, oh, okay, well, what do I need, and how much do I need, and that can help inform, whether you're, what it is that you're going to, where you're going to, what it is that you're doing. I think the map's going to be a little bit more detailed than this, but probably not as detailed in the stuff that I shared over the past week, which again has been cycling through down in the screenshots there. I'll show that once we get through the document. Yeah, and then we also talked about the time slider, allowing you to move through time. I don't think there's anything else that we need to talk about there. I don't think we really need to talk much about the dig UI either, other than that I want to, in addition to having the surrounds be more detailed and communicate a little bit more information about what's going on, I would like to show the current dominant species and an indication of what you have and what you don't have, and then your special abilities down there. It's again, very very rough mock-up, giving you an idea of where things are going to go and what things are going to do, how they're going to look. But at the moment, it's just as you find a fossil, it'll appear in the bottom corner for a while, and then disappear. But I think having the option to see, in order to know whether or not you've got enough to make a new skeleton, and you might want to leave and go and build a skeleton instead of finishing up the dig, it makes sense for me to keep that information visible on the dig screen. And same for the assembly phase. Would like to give you a bit more information there, so you can see the actual queue of fossils that are coming up over time on the side. Yeah, again, don't really need to, and that'll help make it easier to understand when you've only got one bone left or one fossil left. Yeah, it's not gonna that's gonna be a lot more obvious than it currently is. And then here we've got some museum stuff. This was the first little scribble that I did that resulted in the slightly more detailed version of this same scribble that we saw earlier. And so I want to have no UI visible by default, but when you walk up to stuff, you'll have an interact button, and you press that and you get a radial menu showing the options that you've got for interacting. I like the idea of you can look at stuff, you can remove stuff, you can move stuff, and maybe something else. Maybe that's interact, I don't know. or like something else. Don't know. Rotate should probably be another another option. Yeah, so it's just a matter of like walking up to stuff, and then maybe have another button for like if you're next to three things that you can cycle through the things that you want to look at, so that it's not super finicky about how you interact with that sort of stuff. Yeah. So when you interact with, I was talking about having a 2D overlay that pops up in the museum when you interact with something. Like that's the sort of thing that I've got in mind. Is this kind of stuff? I like the idea of having like when you interact with a display cabinet, you get something like what we saw in the prototype earlier when looking at miscellaneous fossils, where it's like you're looking at one and it's like gives you the ability to rotate it around, check it out from different angles, or you can like switch to the next one or the next one or the next one. You can like cycle through the things that are in the display cabinet. Rather than being forced to like look at them from outside, there are other like miscellaneous fun features that I have in mind, like maybe a mode where you can like take a self portrait with a skeleton or something, and get a photo of your avatar in the museum with the stuff. That kind of stuff is sort of fun. Maybe just like a general photo mode as well. Could be kind of fun where you get like a first person view, where you can just like take a screenshot and save that for sharing or storing or whatever else elsewhere. Yeah. Yeah, research UI. I talked before about the idea of having like a recipe and you have slots that you put stuff in. So like the idea being that you click on the slot and it'll give you a drop down where you pick which species you're going to pick, and then you from that a sub menu that shows you which bones you're going to pick or something. And that's how you kind of go through that, and then the research duration, it'll have a amount of time until it's finished. But yeah, I'll make it look nice. That's what I do. Yeah, the other thing is like at the moment I'm imagining that the map phase, let's go back to the map. Where's the map? Here. I'm imagining that the map phase is kind of like the hub, and so like when you want to assemble a skeleton, you do so by interacting with like the list of loose fossils for each species. Like you click on the species and then you've got the build option, and you go to the museum by clicking on the museum button, and so the map screen would be your kind of hub. But if it turns out that doesn't feel right, then I would be open to adding here we are, like a museum concourse or a lobby or something, where like there'd be a bunch of doors, and like one is like through to exhibits, and that's where you go to the museum phase. One will be like your office, and that's where you go to do the map, or one will be like a lab room, and that's where you go to do the assembly. I really enjoyed the concourse in X-Wing and TIE Fighter and stuff, where you've got like all these different doors and bulkheads and stuff to explore, but it's like an active place that has people walking around it and stuff. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. You'll probably be able to see down in the slideshow over here what the main menu currently looks like. We'll take a look at that in a bit. But the idea is that it's going to depict something about dig sites, ideally related to the last thing that you dug up or interacted with. So in the prototype, like the last thing that you dug, or the last thing that you assembled, or the last thing that you looked at in the showcase. When you go back to the main menu, that's what will be in the background. And I kind of like that because it gives you like a way of feeling like the game is reflecting your actions and responding to what you've been doing. But we'll see how that goes. Avatar customization is going to need its own UI. I haven't really dealt with that here, but again, I can show you what I've been doing. Writing and research. I guess this comes back to that question. So Bonesweeper is not going to be a text-heavy game. Writing will be an important part of the museum stuff, though. for the informational displays and the descriptions and stuff. Yeah, I want the tone in general to feel funny, like outside of the museum informational displays, to be more in line with the kind of humor and stuff that's in Hive Time, but with less of an overt central focus, you know. And then, as I said before, like the museum informational displays would be an inversion of Hive Time's Bepedia, where like the fact is the main course, and then the dessert is the little joke at the end. Yeah, I'm expecting somewhere around 10,000 words, but maybe bigger, maybe smaller. I don't know. We'll see. Philosophical objectives and constraints. This is something that I wanted to be very conscious and certain about putting in this document. Like, I want to like lay some hard lines down and explain why I'm making decisions that I'm making. So there are some like general production philosophies, which is like do as much as possible with as little as possible, and to keep the game as playable as possible along as large a portion of development as possible. That way I can get feedback at any point in time, and allows me to better assess the things that I'm adding within the context of what the game currently is. That's often hard to do for, like, I feel like I wouldn't be able to do that as effectively as I have been on my past few projects if I wasn't as experienced as I am. It's something that I think you can really only navigate once you have a certain degree of experience. I don't want mistakes to be game ending, so again, if you smash a bone in the assembly phase, if you smash a bone in the dig phase, like, it doesn't immediately end the game or the mode for you. I like the idea of engaging players with the idea of uncovering secrets from the ground and discovering prehistory from those. Like, that's the core of where everything is at. It's the player's job to imagine what these animals look like when they were alive. The game's focus is depicting fossils, right? Because part of being a paleontologist is imagining what things were like when they were alive. And if I make the game depict that, then that takes away some of your opportunity to imagine that. And that's not my job, right? That's the player's job. And I want to make sure that I am respectful and give the player space to do that. Yeah, humor should be used to enhance a sense of fun, but doesn't distract from the game's identity. The game should expose learning opportunities through access to knowledge and science that players can pursue of their own volition. So again, like, if you want to read the museum displays, you can. If you want to follow the links in the museum displays to research papers and read those, you can, but it's optional, right? Gameplay should not reinforce historical problematic aspects of paleontology, but the game should also not shy away from acknowledging those problems in the informational displays. So it is a sad reality that a lot of fossils have been stolen or were not acquired with permission. Whether that's looted as part of military actions, whether that's taken without permission from the state, or taken without permission from indigenous communities that may have had some claim to an area. Like, that stuff has been, like, so much of the history of paleontology has come from people doing kind of uncle stuff. And I definitely don't want to ask players to engage with doing that as part of my game, which is part of why I was talking before about, like, only letting you visit other countries if you're invited. And the idea being that you're participating in their digs, you're not running a dig in their country or in their spaces. And when you come home, what you bring home is, casts of those fossils. Like, the idea that fossils remain in the places where they were found is really important, I think, for how I want to present the activity of paleontology within the game, but also in the informational displays. Like, I want to give space to talk about these problems and how they exist, and how things that modern contemporary paleontologists and museums are doing to repatriate things and to be respectful of indigenous communities and foreign states and stuff. It's tricky and difficult stuff to navigate, but I feel like it's like important to be thoughtful about how I'm handling it. And so along similar lines, I guess, outside of informational displays and talking about real world stuff, it's very important that the game does. It's very important to me that the game doesn't commodify or depict the commodification of fossils. Fossils belong to the places they were found. So yeah, I don't want to make it so that you're buying and selling fossils, because it's not cool. And it has led to a lot of like uncool black market stuff, and private collectors using huge fortunes to. Yeah, it gets messy and it gets awkward and it gets into territories and spaces that just aren't what I want to communicate with this game, right? And then all aspects of the game should be playable or offer alternative gameplay for non-sighted players, as described previously. And then I have a section where I talk about what is interesting about the game, and this is, I don't know, this is fluff. Like, I don't see any of this as being useful or valuable, but it's stuff that people who aren't game developers who make decisions about where finances go, if you need to convince someone, you need to tell them that you're aware of the fact that these, of which attributes become marketable, right? Which attributes are interesting, which attributes are worth communicating, and which attributes of the project become the core identity of the project and how you pitch it. So yeah, obviously dinosaurs, and there's a small section here that explains why people care about dinosaurs and how contemporary dinosaur presence in popular culture has grown out of particular cases, and how and why that's developed and evolved in a contemporary contexts. And same again for Minesweeper. And then we talk about why expressive customization is valuable to people and how that's valuable to people. I don't care enough to read this stuff out or talk in detail about it. I feel like it's obvious, and it's only here so that I can say that I can prove that I've thought about these things to some degree. And then learning outcomes, again, talking about how and why the informational displays exist, how I've drawn information from the Civilopedia, and the kind of value and impact that had, and how that's being expressed in contemporary games and stuff as well. Yeah, again, talking about being able to plan big and budget big so that I can, well, not big, but plan and budget in a way that allows me to repurpose some of the budget and repurpose some of the scope in order to grow or shrink things as stuff allows. But if production slack is available, then I would like to expand the number of species and things as discussed earlier in the document. But if it's not, then I'm open to considering some of those things as post-release updates or DLC, which we mentioned earlier as well. I don't mind the idea of adding a option for this section talks about things that aren't covered earlier so much, but could make sense. So the ability for players to write their own object descriptions feels like it could be cool. Yeah, an option for sharing museums is something that I considered. That was a question from earlier, which is sort of vaguely touched on here. I put it in the scope extension space because I wanted to make it clear that those things were not things that anybody should be expecting, but things that I'm open to considering if the possibility arises to do it, but is like something that I'm considering outside the scope of the core game, right? Same with multiplayer. The idea of having a peer-to-peer multiplayer session where you can go and visit someone else's museum and have them, they can show you around their museum. That's cool, right? But also maybe a dig phase, multiplayer dig phase could be kind of fun. Multiplayer assembly phase could be kind of fun. I could imagine that being chaotic in a fun and exciting way. The ability to do custom skeleton poses could be fun. I think I can just like set up some IK and some targets and some controls and just let players move stuff around, and that could be kind of cool. But yeah, like I've also noted whether things are high effort items, and that's a high effort item. I mean, people will make, dinosaurs doing rude gestures and stuff, and honestly, if people want to do that, then if they're doing that in their own game, that's fine. I don't care. Let them. Why not? Why not? If people want to have like a bunch of dinosaurs having sex, then that's fine. I don't care. That's like, if that's how people want to express themselves, that's how people can express themselves. And in fact, that is an interesting aspect of paleontology that people do put real attention and thought and research into, even though we don't have much in the way of evidence. Like that kind of behaviors don't preserve very well. But we have found some scratch marks on the ground that we believe may be evidence of mating, and we do know a bit about nesting behaviors, and that's kind of cool as well. So yeah, like dinosaur reproduction is definitely a thing. It's a valid thing. Additional species is obviously like something that I would like to be able to expand through. I like the idea of maybe expanding into non-Mesozoic animals. But it's funny how we say rated M for mature when we think about stuff like that. When like 9 times out of 10, it's immature, right? Like it's definitely immature. Like I like the idea of going doing like a Paleolithic DLC was like you know, mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and things like that'd be kind of fun. Or some like Cambrian DLC maybe with Dimetrodons and things, early Archosaurs and stuff. Maybe an option for allowing players to dismantle an assembled skeleton and use that then as components to build another skeleton, like as a way of reclaiming things for research, or as a way for yeah, yeah. Yeah, reclaiming those for research or trying to rebuild things with like consistent materials to make them, try and have less of that mismatched look and feel as part of like late game activities that you can do. Could be a thing that I could do. You can always expand the number of dig environments as well, expand the number of dig abilities. I've got a bunch of ideas potentially that I could make use of there. More avatar customization options, more museum displays. Like these are all like fairly obvious ways of expanding the scope, right? But yeah, that's it. That's the entire document. This was the bulk of my my grant application. I think I'm going to talk about budget next time. Like my throat's feeling a bit used up. But I did say that I would show off some other bits and pieces. Particularly, let's start with UI, right? So this is what the dev build looks like at the moment. I did some concept art, like super rough, to put in the background here. This will not stay. This is not final. But it does give like an idea of something that's going on, and that's kind of fun. So I like the idea of make a new game, and you've got a bunch of customization options. It'll probably look fairly different, but the idea being that you would have the preview of your avatar here, that you can see as you change the different things. Feels kind of fun. And as a load screen would also have a preview of the character and some information and stuff. This is super rough. This is very much going to change. If we go into my map test here, this is what my current development version of the map screen looks like, and this is all like very temporary, very placeholder assets. Like I said, I want to go for like a parchment look and feel for the map here. All these backgrounds, these bookcases are from Hive Time. These skeletons and models and stuff are from the prototype. yeah, like this idea of you know, mouse over, get a little bit of information, see a list of possible species you can find, see the size and difficulty, make a decision on what you're going to do, click on it, get some options of like, you know, get a confirm button, but then you've also got this time slider so that you can see what it looked like. This currently only goes back 66 million years. That's all I needed to get a working proof of concept for this type of implementation. Work out what my workflow was going to look like. But yeah, it was pretty straightforward to. Well, it was a lot of experimentation. It was a lot of thought, a little bit of research, and then a little bit of experimentation to arrive at here. Yeah, it's fun to do. The time slider is like there's no data. It's a shape key that I've modeled in Blender. I may as well open this up. Give you a look. I haven't shown off any of this stuff before. So this is the first time anyone gets to see it. Globe. Globe test one applied. Yeah, okay. So here it is. Here's the 3D geometry that I'm working with. I mean, there we go. Okay, yeah. So this is just like a 3D mesh. And then I have some shape keys set up, and this shape key just moves it like that in place, and I use skeletal animation to, if I scrub through the timeline, that moves it down to where it needs to be. Because if I use shape keys to move it along the surface of the sphere, it doesn't move along the surface of the sphere. It goes from point A through the globe to point B, right? So I need to use a skeleton, an armature, to do the rotation, but I can't reasonably use a skeleton to deform the coastline, because otherwise I'd need to have like 20,000 bones around the edge of every every landmass that was going to change, right? Like it makes more sense to use something that's a bit more organic, like the shape keys here, which was just me going through and moving these. Oh, it's not gonna let me do that. Yeah, so it's just me moving the vertices around manually per shape keys, and that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about when I'm saying that that I'm looking at research and then having my own artist's interpretation of what it looks like. Yeah, I created it from scratch. All this created from scratch. But like I said, the final version will likely be much less detailed than what we have here. Yeah. So that's that at the moment. And it's also got the ability I can press tab to cycle through the currently active dig sites, which will make that accessible to people who are vision impaired or blind or can't use a keyboard or mouse to interact. Oh, can't use the mouse to interact with this, like sort of in an analog fashion. I like the idea of being able to just tab through them as well. So the other thing that I made was this test museum here, where I've got a little character that I made, and the character is entirely placeholder, just a little experimentation to try and work out what level of detail, what level of fidelity it's going to need, and these are all skeletons from the prototype. We've got the little display cases here, got the posters on the wall, got the cool pterosaur hanging. You might be able to recognize that this is more or less based on the where is it? Concept art, museum new. There it is. So more or less aimed to be a recreation of this sketch. Yeah, I can be bothered making a run animation, so I just made it so I can hold down shift. The character controller is super temporary, super rough. But yeah, so I wanted to make a little space where you can walk around and check things out. And like I mainly want to do this and the globe so that I could have something to show off and say, hey, look, I'm working on this game. Here are some things that are different from the prototype. and give you an idea of what to expect moving forward into development. So these are all like very quick and dirty mock-ups. There are no collisions. Since it's just me recording video of me walking around, like there's no reason for me to bother with things like collisions and stuff. Like you just assume that you can't walk through things until you find out that you can. And same if we walk up to the end of the corridor here, there's nothing past that. These posters, super quick and dirty. You know, just very quickly making things. But this, as a visual interpretation in this visual impression of what the museum is going to look like and how you're going to interface with it, how you're going to interact with it, it does what it needs to do. And same with the globe. Like the assets are all placeholder, but it does kind of give you an idea of how you're going to interact with this and what kind of presence it's going to have. Another thing that I've been playing with over the past few days, which I think I alluded to or mentioned earlier, is that I've been experimenting with ways that I can get more variation out of the tiles in the dig phase. So if I hop over to the inspector here, turn off some tiles. Probably turn off a couple other tiles as well. There we go. All right, that's probably enough. So this is just one model, right? But I have the ability to get a whole bunch of different variations out of this same model, so that things feel a little bit more organic. There isn't enough variation, but as far as the proof of concept goes, this is fine. And what I'm doing here is I've got a set of shape keys. There's a shape key for every corner. This corner, this corner, this corner, and the far corner. And at every intersection point where 4 corners meet, all of those get the same value for the shape key for the corresponding corner at that intersection. And they're all set up so that they align properly. Excuse me. So this allows me to have like seamless tiles that have some level of variation to them, without me having to make like a half dozen or a dozen different tiles and then place them all randomly. I can just like put random values here, and because shape keys are like a percentage influence, I've got like an analog range, which gives me more flexibility than what I would have if I made like 3 or 4 separate models. I would only have those 3 or 4 separate models, whereas here I've got like a full range from 0 to 100 of different stuff. I need to, these are placeholder. They'll be much more detailed and much more interesting, but I'm pretty happy with how this is coming out in terms of giving me the opportunity to have a whole lot of variation off one model. I have less models to maintain, like less assets to keep track of and maintain. Hey Toman Blue, welcome. It's always nice to see a fellow Godot user. Yeah, I'm very glad to be using Godot for this project. Like, I'm enjoying using it, so yeah, looking forward to getting another project with Godot out the door and finding whatever hurdles I find along the way and finding ways to fix those, and maybe doing some upstream contributions again if I find stuff that I can fix. Yeah, so shape keys are stored in the model file. We can actually see this in here. Let's expand this out and oh, hang on. Let me. Yeah, that's the one that I want to work with. Okay, so this is this tile here, and I've got just like a little kind of first-person camera controller that I've got here. We can see here that we've got 3 or 4, 5 available blend shapes. And I can't remember which is which. We can see here that we can go from this to this. Is the different options we've got, and then every corner has its own set of stuff that it can do. Well, I can't really see the far side, but yeah. And then I've also got this middle one that can look a bit different, just to give an extra layer of variation. Oh, nice. Welcome. I used to help out with community management for Double Fine. I don't do any work with them at the moment, but a lot of nice people there in the community, and a lot of nice people there among the dev team. So welcome. Nice to meet you. Yeah. So does that answer the question about blend shapes split? Oh goodness, should have another drink. Oh goodness. Yeah. All right. Well, that's yeah, that's really all I've got to show off today. This looks like some kind of cake. I'd like to eat this cake. Yeah, so sometimes they're called blend shapes, sometimes they're called shape keys, sometimes they're called it's another name and I don't remember what it is. Yeah. Which version of Blender which version of Godot am I using? I'm using 3.4.2 and I'll stay on 3.4 for the rest of this project. Like well, maybe I'll move up to 3.5. I don't know. I'll have to make a decision about whether or not that brings in new features that I want. But yeah. Anyway, yeah, I'm going to come back and continue on with this whole like looking at the grant application materials as part of an ongoing thing, and also showing off stuff that I'm doing. Like the stuff that I'm doing at the moment isn't particularly interesting. But yeah, happy to show it all off. I would like to get to a point where I'm doing regular dev streams, so if that sounds like fun, keep an eye out for all of that. Yeah, to anybody who showed up relatively recently, sorry that you missed everything, but let me shower you in links. I'll give you a link to the prototype, which you can find on itch. It's fully playable. It doesn't include the map screen, it doesn't include the museum, but it does have sort of base gameplay for digging, for assembly, and it has a showcase, which kind of fills the museum type role, but without any of the museum interactivity. I can give you a link to a post that has the concept doc attached to it there. That's what we've been going through for the most of this stream. And I can also give you a link to let's do the TTS thing, because like I mentioned TTS integration, which is text to speech, and I gave a little talk. Here are the slides from that talk about the text to speech integration that I did for the prototype. So yeah. That's about all I had to go through today. Thank you again for hanging around. Thanks for the questions. It's been nice to be able to expand on what my plans for the project are. Definitely been cool to like go through that that concept doc and be able to like talk about some of the larger broader view idea of what the shape of the game scope looks like moving forward, because I don't know how apparent that is from the screenshots and stuff that I've shared, but it's all in my head. That stuff's all been in my head. That document was pretty easy to write. Like most of it was stuff that I'd thought about while I was making the prototype and knew that I wasn't going to be able to include as part of the sort of small thing that I was making. So when it came time to write that document, it was all pretty much ready to go. Just sat down at a keyboard, let it all come out. Oh, and did that little sketch. Yeah. Anyway, have fun. I'll be back again next week. Ow. Goodbye.